Chapter 1842. Mysterious Scabbard, let's go in and take a look. After thinking for a while, Juan finally decided to go down to investigate. Thinking of this, Juan stomped his right foot and suddenly rushed down. He was extremely fast, like a bolt of black lightning. The moment he approached the terrifying whirlpool, he immediately took out the Fushi cauldron. The Fushi cauldron had the ability to absorb pressure. This terrifying whirlpool was formed by the pressure emitted by the demigod's head, so it was naturally the best choice to use the Fushi cauldron to protect himself. Slowly going into the depths of the whirlpool, Yuan entered the deepest part of the whirlpool without any danger. Then, he arrived in front of Zhanbai's head. Zhanbai's head was extremely large, dozens of feet in size. It was sealed in ice, and there was a look of facing death on his face. It was the expression that had frozen at the last moment when he had chosen to self-destruct. Yuan quietly stared at Zhanbai's head, especially when he saw the expression of facing death on Zhanbai's face before he died. He was deeply shocked. It was extremely difficult to cultivate to become a demigod. At such a cultivation level, Zhanbai was willing to sacrifice himself without any complaints or regrets. Yuan sincerely admired him. Zhanbai is the hero who protected the heavenly armor continent back then. Now that I've discovered his head here, I naturally can't ignore it. Yuan sighed softly and waved his sleeve. Immediately, flames swept out like a fire dragon and surrounded Zhanbai's head. Not long after, the ice around Zhanbai's head was completely melted by the flames, revealing Zhanbai's true appearance. At this moment, Yuan discovered that there was an extremely deep hole in between Zhanbai's eyebrows. This hole was extremely dark, like an abyss. Yuan stared at the hole in between Zhanbai's eyebrows in surprise. As Zhanbai's head was dozens of feet in size, and the hole in between Zhanbai's eyebrows was also about 10 feet in size, it was just enough to allow Yuan to enter. Seeing this hole, Yuan immediately became curious. His eyes flickered, and in the end he decided to enter the hole to take a look. He knew very well that Zhanbai was a demigod after all. Although he had chosen to sacrifice himself to protect the heavenly armor planet, it was unlikely that he would not leave his inheritance behind. If he could obtain Zhanbai's inheritance, it would be extremely beneficial to him. When he thought up to this point, Yuan stomped his right foot and brought the Fushi cauldron with him as he entered the hole between Zhanbai's eyebrows like a ray of light. After entering, Yuan pointed with his right finger, and a flame flashed out, illuminating the surroundings. He discovered that the surrounding passageways were filled with blood-red veins. After walking in the tunnel for about 2 hours, Yuan arrived at the end of the tunnel. He discovered that there were countless strands of blood in front of him. It looked extremely strange, and in the middle of these strands of blood, there was a sword sheath lying quietly. The sword sheath looked ordinary, and there were several bloodstains on the surface of the sword sheath, indicating that the sword sheath had been through some kind of fierce battle. Yuan's gaze fell on the sword sheath, and he slowly squinted. Although the sword sheath looked ordinary, Yuan would not foolishly treat it as an ordinary item. How could something that the demigod Zhanbai had placed in between his eyebrows be ordinary? However, for some reason, Yuan felt an extremely strong sense of danger around the sword sheath. This sense of danger did not come out of nowhere. He had felt it the moment he entered the hole between Zhanbai's eyebrows. This sense of danger faintly told him that if he took the sword sheath out, perhaps something ominous would happen. After hesitating for a moment, Yuan finally decided to take the sword sheath out. He knew very well that if he did not take it out this time, he would not have another chance in the future. After all, if the sword sheath was really a demigod item, it would become a treasure that countless experts in the outside world would go crazy over. If he missed this opportunity, it would be too late for regrets. Take it. Yuan made up his mind. He then pointed with his right hand, and countless yellow spring water droplets flew out, forming a huge gate of reincarnation in front of him. At the same time, he summoned the Fushi cauldron by his side in case of any accidents. After doing all that, Yuan extended his right hand and grabbed the scabbard. Then, with a tug, he pulled it out. Rumble! The moment Yuan grabbed the sword sheath, an extremely violent tremor suddenly transmitted through Zhanbai's head. It was as if the earth was shaking, and it was exceptionally terrifying and violent. Then Juan smelled an extremely unpleasant stench in the passage. He was very familiar with this stench. It was the smell of decay. Without thinking, Juan grabbed the sword sheath and immediately retreated out of the passage. Soon he rushed out of the passage. Then he was shocked to find that Jean Bai's head was rapidly decaying. Moreover, Juan also found that the moment Jean Bai's head decayed, the head suddenly exploded, and countless red mist burst out. The red mist was densely packed and spread out in all directions. However, this spread only lasted for 2 breaths of time. Then an extremely terrifying suction force came from the center of the red mist and absorbed all the red mist. After the red mist was completely absorbed, Juan saw a huge exotic beast that was dozens of feet long. The moment he saw this exotic beast, Juan's pupils shrank into needles because he found that the appearance of this exotic beast was exactly the same as the phantom beast head between Kong Wen and the black and white giant's eyebrows. Even the outline was the same. However, Kong Wen and the black and white giant only had a mark between their eyebrows, while the exotic beast in front of him was real. The exotic beast opened its scarlet eyes and stared coldly at Juan. Then, it roared at the sky, and a terrifying sound wave spread out in all directions. The instant the sound wave spread out, Juan was shocked to find that countless cracks had appeared on the surface of the countless ice blocks floating above, and the corpses in the ice blocks were awakened. They opened their eyes and stared coldly at Juan. Feeling the focus of so many gazes, Juan only felt his scalp go numb. Then, the corpses broke out of the ice blocks and rushed towards Juan. Their ferocious roars filled the surroundings. Swoosh! At the same time, the exotic beast roared again. It stomped its right foot and suddenly rushed toward Juan at an extremely fast speed. Go! Juan tapped with his right finger, causing the door of reincarnation to shoot out explosively like a shuttle, and it fiercely obstructed the beast's path. On the other hand, Juan swiftly flashed towards the top of the pool with the Fushi cauldron. Boom! The gate of reincarnation was powerful and blocked the exotic beast for a moment. However, the exotic beast's strength was extraordinary, and the gate of reincarnation could only block it for a moment before it was completely shattered. Swoosh! Swoosh! At the instant Juan fled towards the top of the pool, the corpses that flashed out of the ice blocks flashed toward Juan. Fortunately, the movements of these corpses were extremely stiff, and their strengths weren't strong. They were only around the earthly immortal realm, so they didn't pose much of a threat to Juan. On the other hand, the main threat to Juan was the exotic beast that was flashing towards him from behind. This exotic beast was extremely formidable, and even an ordinary peak heavenly immortal realm expert might not be a match for this exotic beast. If he was entangled by it, then it would be extremely troublesome for Juan. When he thought up to here, Juan immediately utilized the energy of Tao Insight, causing countless ripples to suffuse the soles of his feet. After that, the surrounding water transformed into 2 vortexes that converged at the soles of Juan's feet, causing Juan to seem like a raging dragon that flashed explosively towards the top of the pool. Swoosh! Swoosh! Juan's speed was extremely fast, and the speed of those corpses couldn't be compared to that of Juan at all. Therefore, Juan's agile movements allowed him to avoid all of the corpses, and he quickly swam towards the top of the pool. There were a few corpses that happened to be blocking his path. In order not to waste any time, Juan directly punched out with his perfect divine body, and those corpses were directly smashed into powder by his punch. The roar of the exotic beast got closer. Wherever the exotic beast passed, all of the corpses retreated, and it was basically unimpeded. At the same time, clouds of blood mist suddenly burst out from the exotic beast's body, and in the blood mist, streaks of blood quickly flashed toward Juan. At this moment, Juan's speed was enhanced by Tao Insight, so he smoothly blasted all the corpses that blocked his path into powder. When those streaks of blood rushed over and approached Juan's pupils shrank slightly, and he immediately used the immortal technique Lone Peak. Surging celestial core power condensed from his fingertips and turned into an incomparably huge and proud mountain peak. The Lone Peak descended from the sky, stirring up an endless water storm in the pool, blocking the incoming bloodlines. Juan, on the other hand, continued to flee upwards without stopping. Boom! The lone peak didn't last for long, and under the attack of the streaks of blood, it exploded into countless pieces. The exotic beast roared even more angrily. Its red eyes stared at Zhuan, and it couldn't wait to swallow Zhuan whole. On the rock in the center of the small pool, a small water droplet suddenly trembled and then suddenly burst open. A vast amount of energy spread out, causing the rock walls around the small pool to shake violently. A rather embarrassed figure swept out from the countless splashes of water. Spurt! He Wushang spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was pale and bloodless. As soon as he emerged, he roared towards the sky. You and I are irreconcilable. Don't let me see you again, or I'll kill you every time I see you. No one will be able to protect you this time. He Wushang was simply flustered and exasperated this time. With his experience, he naturally knew that there was a powerful ancient seal in the ocean. However, he didn't know that Zhuan had actually grasped the ancient seal and used it to deal with him. It truly infuriated him. Moreover, due to the collapse of the oceanic world, the powerful energy that it produced caused He Wushang's injuries to worsen. His cultivation fell from the peak of the heavenly immortal realm to the late stage of the heavenly immortal realm. The fall of his cultivation infuriated He Wushang even more. He had almost lost his mind. If he encountered Zhuan again, he would definitely kill Zhuan regardless of the consequences. After all, it was extremely difficult to cultivate again after the fall of one's cultivation. Moreover, the price to pay was extremely great. But suddenly, a figure scuttled out of the small pool, and countless splashes of water splashed out. Chapter 1843. Secret Plachuan stomped his right foot and immediately shot out of the water, causing countless splashes. After that, he felt an extremely dense gaze filled with killing intent. He slowly turned his head and focused his gaze on He Wushang, who wasn't too far away. His pupils constricted. You really didn't need any effort. You're dead meat today. He Wushang laughed nastily. He stomped his right foot and shot explosively toward Zhuan. At the same time, he waved his right sleeve and countless strands of celestial core power condensed into a long saber that was several meters long. He suddenly slashed with the saber. Zhuan silently stared at He Wushang as his divine sense penetrated deep into the exotic beast at the bottom of the pool. The instant the exotic beast was about to break out of the water, Zhuan's eyes revealed a resolute expression. Then he tilted his body and dove headfirst into the pool just as the exotic beast broke out of the water. But the sound of water breaking and entering rang out at the same time. The exotic beast hadn't expected Zhuan to dive back into the pool. Similarly, He Wushang hadn't expected Zhuan to do so either. And it was precisely this coincidence that caused He Wushang and the exotic beast to collide fiercely. He Wushang's saber suddenly swung over and landed heavily on the exotic beast's head. Bang! He Wushang felt his right hand go numb. Then, the long saber in his hand had unknowingly shattered into countless pieces. Taking a few steps back, He Wushang stared at the exotic beast in front of him in astonishment. He hadn't expected the exotic beast's body to be so tough. The exotic beast was actually unharmed by the saber. Ooh! The exotic beast roared at the sky. He Wushang's saber hadn't been light. Moreover, it had landed directly on its head. Even though the exotic beast's body was indeed strong, it didn't mean that it didn't feel any pain at all. The exotic beast suddenly turned its head. Its eyes were filled with rage. After so many years, this was the first time it had been hit so painfully by someone. It had almost lost its mind. As for Zhuan's whereabouts, it didn't care at all. The only thing it wanted now was to completely tear apart the human cultivator in front of it. The exotic beast roared and charged toward He Wushang like a bolt of lightning. He Wushang's face was unsightly. He instantly understood what had happened. He knew that he had been tricked by Zhuan. You little bastard. He Wushang was flustered and exasperated. Seeing the strange beast pouncing towards him, he could only helplessly form a seal with both hands. Countless saber lights and sword shadows emanated from his body. Immortal technique, saber light and sword shadow. Saber and sword shadows filled the surroundings, forming an extremely powerful trap. trapping the exotic beast within. Unfortunately, the exotic beast was no ordinary creature. It opened its mouth and spat out a mouthful of green liquid. This mouthful of green liquid was really strange. It contained a strong corrosive power. The moment the green liquid was spat out, the surrounding saber lights and sword shadows were directly corroded by the green liquid and collapsed inch by inch. He Wushang's eyes were gloomy. He stomped his right foot and leaped up. Then, he formed a seal with both hands and immediately used the King Blade's Saint Talisman. The exotic beast gave him a strong sense of danger. He knew that if he didn't use the King Blade's Saint Talisman, he wouldn't be the exotic beast's match. In the pool, Zhuan silently watched the ongoing battle between He Wushang and the exotic beast. He wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, he was waiting. He was very clear that the exotic beast's strength was absolutely extraordinary, and it would definitely force He Wushang to use his powerful trump card. At that time, when the battle between the two of them reached its climax, it would be the best time for Zhuo to attack. He Wushang had targeted Zhuo many times. If he let him go this time, he would definitely be plotted against again. Moreover, the King Blade's Saint Talisman on He Wushang's body had unimaginable benefits for the origin source Saint Talisman in Zhuowen's body. As for the other corpses in the pool, they were suppressed by Zhuowen's Fushi Cauldron. The powerful aura released by the Fushi Cauldron wasn't something these corpses could withstand. Immortal Art Blade Void Slash. He Wushang bit the tip of his tongue and spat on the surface of the King Blade's Saint Talisman. Then, he pointed with his right hand and terrifying blade shadows emerged from the Saint Talisman. Then, He Wushang pointed with his right hand again. The blade shadows condensed at his fingertip and turned into a thumb-sized blacked slash. He Wushang's fingertip carried the blackta. Then, he drew a line in front of him. Instantly, as his fingers slid, countless black rays gathered at his fingertip and formed a huge blade shadow. The blade shadow was extremely extraordinary. It was shaped like a crescent moon, but no one could see where the end of the blade shadow was. It was as if the blade shadow had no end. The moment the saber shadow swept out, the rock walls around the small pool were immediately flattened. It was as if the surrounding rock walls had been directly cut by the saber shadow. Countless rocks fell from above, and the space also trembled violently. The strange beast's eyes narrowed. Its scarlet eyes revealed a rare dignified expression. It could feel that the blade shadow was extraordinary. However, it didn't retreat. Instead, it roared and pushed its right foot into the air. Instead of retreating, it advanced. Furthermore, as the exotic beast charged out, countless bloody mists gushed out from its body. As the bloody mists gushed out, blood-colored meridians shot out one after another, condensing into a huge blood-colored mouth around its body. In the depths of the blood-colored mouth, there was a blood-colored vortex. The vortex spun rapidly. It contained a powerful suction force that seemed to be able to swallow everything. Rumble! The blade shadow and the blood-colored mouth collided. Then there was a cracking sound. Countless cracks appeared on the rock walls around the pool. At the same time, the moment the cracks appeared on the rock walls, the surrounding space also distorted. The shattered rock walls all disappeared in the distorted space, turning the surroundings into a terrifying vacuum. Under the impact of the collision, countless splashes of water shot up into the sky, forming terrifying water pillars. These water pillars shot up into the sky and then fell down one after another. There were countless sounds of water splashing. Yun, who was in the pool, narrowed his eyes. His celestial core power spread out around him to resist the terrifying water vortex around him. His eyes were fixed on the sky. But suddenly, a huge figure flew out from the sky and landed in the pool. Another figure flew towards the exit in front of the pool. Zhuan didn't even look at the figure that fell into the pool because it wasn't He Wushang. It was the strange beast. At this moment, the strange beast was in an extremely sorry state. Its scales were rolled up and covered in blood. Its aura was weak. Then, Zhuan jumped out of the water and rushed towards He Wushang, who was flying towards the exit in front of him. Killing Finger of the Underworld. Celestial Technique Lone Peak. Celestial Technique Asking Buddha. Before he got close to He Wushang, Zhuan used the 3 celestial techniques in a spurt of energy. The moment the celestial techniques were used, invisible ripples of Tao will spread out and enveloped the 3 celestial techniques. Little bastard! He Wushang was in an extremely sorry state. His face was pale and blood was seeping out of the corner of his mouth. The accumulated injuries in his body had become even more serious after the fight with the strange beast. Due to the previous injuries, his cultivation had fallen to the advanced stage of the Earth Immortal realm. Now, after the fight with the strange beast, his cultivation immediately became unstable again and could fall to the intermediate stage of the Earth Immortal realm at any time. This was undoubtedly the moment when He Wushang was at his weakest. Zhuan took advantage of this opportunity to strike. Even though He Wushang was depressed and angry, it was still useless. Old man, you've been picking on me. If I don't pay you back, you'll look down on me. Zhuan's eyes were cold as the 3 celestial techniques landed on He Wushang. At the same time, Zhuan used the devouring curse seal. Countless curse seal chains swept out and sealed He Wushang in all directions, making it difficult for him to escape. Seeing Zhuan's move, He Wushang cursed inwardly, but there was nothing he could do. He could only forcefully gather his celestial core power and spit it out. Then, countless weapon shadows turned into an oval-shaped vortex that surrounded his body. The King Blade Saint Talisman floated in front of him. However, the King Blade Saint Talisman's brilliance was obviously a little dim. It was obvious that the King Blade Saint Talisman had suffered heavy damage in the previous battle. Bang, bang, bang. The 3 celestial techniques and the power of Tao will finally landed on He Wushang's defense. Then, He Wushang's pupils constricted and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The countless weapon shadows in front of him shattered. Sky Immortal? When did you become a Sky Immortal? This is impossible. He Wushang's pupils constricted. Although he had some guesses when the Sky Immortal Thunder Tribulation appeared, the Sky Immortal Thunder Tribulation disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Therefore, he didn't pay much attention to it. He also didn't expect Zhuan to become a Sky Immortal. After all, when Zhuan entered this place, he was only a late-stage Earth Immortal. There was a big gap between him and a Sky Immortal. It was impossible for him to become a Sky Immortal in such a short time. But now, the power of the 3 celestial techniques that Zhuan used was far beyond his expectations. This was definitely not a power that an Earth Immortal could use. This was because Zhuan's 3 celestial techniques were far more powerful than before. They had reached the level of a Sky Immortal. In addition to the power of Tao Will, Zhuan's 3 celestial techniques were used at the same time. Even a late-stage Earth Immortal expert wouldn't dare to take it head-on. If He Wushang was at his peak, he wouldn't be afraid of Zhuan's attack. However, his injuries were too severe. His cultivation had fallen to the late-stage Earth Immortal realm. Moreover, he had fought with the exotic beast. His injuries were so severe that he was like an arrow at the end of its flight. As for Zhuan's 3 immortal techniques, it was absolutely a calamity for him. He Wushang spat out a mouthful of blood and fell like a meteor. He smashed into the ground and formed a huge pit. The King Blade Saint Talisman revolved around He Wushang. However, the brilliance on its surface was getting dimmer. It wasn't much different from an ordinary talisman. You're dead. Chapter 1844. Crazy moved. Inside the hole, He Wushang's face was pale as he spat out a mouthful of blood. When he saw the figure falling from above, his expression changed drastically. Heaven and earth reversal. He Wushang ignored the serious injuries on his body and pinched the sword finger on his right hand, pointing at the slightly dimmed King Blade Saint Talisman. Swoosh. When He Wushang's right finger touched the King Blade Saint Talisman, the King Blade Saint Talisman exploded with blazing illusory light. The illusory light contained endless illusory shadows of all kinds of weapons. There were too many illusory weapons, and their speed was too fast. In the blink of an eye, they filled the space where the small pool was. Then, Zhuan discovered that the surrounding scenery was spinning as if the entire world had been turned upside down. He was clearly approaching He Wushang, but strangely, he discovered that the closer he got, the further away he was from He Wushang. What's going on? Zhuowen's pupils shrank. What was happening to him was too strange. He was clearly moving forward, but the current situation showed that he was constantly retreating. He Wushang clutched his chest as he coldly stared at Zhuan. His eyes flickered, but in the end he decided to leave this place first. His injuries were too severe. If he continued to fight, his cultivation might really fall to the mid-stage sky immortal realm. At that time, it would be too late for regrets. Count yourself lucky. The next time I meet you, I'll make you suffer a fate worse than death. He Wushang coldly snorted. With a wave of his right hand, the King Blade Saint Talisman appeared in his hand. With a stomp of his right foot, he planned to leave this space. Unfortunately, when he Wushang reached the entrance of the passageway, the sound of something tearing through the air could be heard. It was heading straight for He Wushang's face. He Wushang's pupils shrank as he stared at the incoming fist. The timing of the fist was too tricky. It happened to be when He Wushang was the most relaxed after leaving the passageway. Therefore, He Wushang didn't have time to defend himself. He could only block in front of his face with his right hand. Celestial yuan erupted from his right arm, forming a blazing white light. Kacha! When the punch landed on He Wushang's right arm, He Wushang felt as if a mountain was pressing down on his hand. Then his right arm was twisted and fractured. He spat out a mouthful of blood and retreated. He stared gloomily at the figure in front of him. The young man in front of him was dressed in a tight-fitting outfit. His posture was vigorous, and his face was expressionless. His facial features were well-defined, and his sturdy body was filled with a rich dark gold color. Zhuowen. He Wushang held onto his fractured right hand and took a few steps back. Then, he looked at the figure trapped in the reversal of heaven and earth and realized that the figure trapped in the reversal of heaven and earth was also Zhuowen. His face instantly darkened. He didn't expect Zhuowen to have such a trick up his sleeve. It was Zhuowen's perfect sacred body that had appeared at the entrance of the passageway. With the great power and physique of a perfect sacred body, it was comparable to a mid-stage heaven immortal expert. It could even fight a late-stage earth immortal expert. Due to He Wushang's serious injuries, his realm of late-stage heaven immortal was already unstable. Coupled with the surprise attack of the perfect sacred body, it wasn't strange for He Wushang to be pushed back. Zhuowen had secretly placed the perfect sacred body at the entrance of the passageway. If He Wushang tried to escape, the perfect sacred body could appear and stop him from escaping. Zhuowen, who was inside the reversal of heaven and earth, touched his glabella with his right hand and immediately took out the Fushi cauldron. At this moment, he didn't hold back at all. He released all the pressure in the Fushi cauldron. Rumble! The boundless pressure turned into an existence akin to a raging dragon that swept out in all directions. Under the impact of the pressure dragon, the power that could reverse the universe crumbled and collapsed. Zhuowen's real body walked over step by step. He held the Fushi cauldron in his right hand and smashed it toward He Wushang. The terrifying pressure was like a terrifying hurricane that swept out in all directions. It looked exceptionally terrifying. At the same time, the perfect Saint Physique's right foot stepped into the void. Like a shuttle, it suddenly rushed over and appeared in front of He Wushang in an instant. With a punch, the surrounding space exploded, forming a chain-like pressure that heavily trapped He Wushang within. He Wushang's eyes were gloomy. He could only use the King Blade Saint Talisman to block in front of him. At the same time, he flicked his finger and took out a long black stick-like weapon from his spirit ring. This stick-like weapon was very strange. It was surrounded by all kinds of weapon phantoms. There were sabers, spears, and swords everywhere. Heavenly Saint Weapon, 100 weapons? Zhuowen stared at the strange weapon in He Wushang's hand and suddenly became cautious. After all, the 100 weapons were Heavenly Saint weapons. They were extraordinary. Zhuowen didn't dare to underestimate them. He Wushang grabbed with his right hand and slapped the King Blade Saint Talisman on the 100 weapons. Suddenly, the countless weapon phantoms on the surface of the 100 weapons began to boil. It was like a strange gray storm that constantly swept out and exploded. He Wushang grabbed the 100 weapons with his right hand and suddenly spun it. Then, the 100 weapons were ruthlessly thrown out. The storm formed by the countless weapon phantoms was filled with violent intent. Bang, bang, bang. When the weapon phantoms hit the pressure released by the Fushi cauldron, there was a terrifying cracking sound. Then, the surrounding space began to tremble. Rumble. At the same time, the perfect sacred body's attack came like a dragon and heavily smashed in front of He Wushang. He Wushang's pupils shrank. He let out a low roar and suddenly pointed at the surface of the 100 weapons. An even more terrifying weapon phantoms surged out and rushed toward the perfect sacred body, wanting to completely crush him. Dun, dun, dun. The weapon phantoms were indeed powerful. The perfect sacred body only felt his fist go numb when he punched it. He couldn't help but retreat. At the same time, the pressure emanated by the Fushi cauldron actually started to show signs of collapse. Zhuo Wen's eyes narrowed as he flicked his sleeve and put the Fushi cauldron away. On the other hand, the pressure was completely shattered by the storm of weapons. Zhuo Wen's body kicked out. Dao will spread under his feet. Like an illusory ghost, he constantly flashed and dodged the attacks of the weapon phantoms around him. Combine! Huan let out the low roar. The perfect sacred body not far away suddenly stepped forward and directly entered Zhuo Wen's body. Zhuo Wen's aura suddenly skyrocketed. Zhuo Wen's movements were like moving clouds and flowing water. With the support of Dao Will, his speed was almost comparable to the peak of the Heaven Immortal Realm. He constantly shuttled between the weapon phantoms and instantly swept in front of He Wushang. 9 turn golden crack runes. Zhuo Wen immediately released 9 golden runes. These 9 golden runes overlapped around his right arm and kept rotating, emitting a brilliant golden light. Then, he clenched his right fist and directly punched out. The 9 golden runes kept overlapping, forming a huge golden rune. It was like a huge golden mountain that crushed down. He Wushang's pupils shrank. He stared at the golden mountain that was getting closer and closer. He let out an angry roar. He held the 100 weapons in his right hand and suddenly stabbed it toward the sky. The 100 weapons spun fiercely and formed an extremely sharp black spike at the tip. Bang! The golden mountain and the 100 weapons collided. An invisible force spread out from the soles of their feet. Then, countless cracks spread out from the ground under their feet. They exploded into countless pieces of gravel and powder. Zhuan squinted his eyes. He pointed at the surface of the golden mountain with his right hand. The power of Dao will spread out and envelop the golden mountain, causing the golden mountain's power to reach its peak. He Wushang spat out a mouthful of blood. His face grew paler and paler as he retreated repeatedly. He'd already suffered heavy injuries. Now that he'd been struck by such a powerful attack from Zhuo Wen, it was simply like adding injuries on top of injuries. His cultivation dropped from the advanced stage of the Heavenly Immortal Realm to the intermediate stage of the Heavenly Immortal Realm. Blood flowed from the corner of Zhuo Wen's mouth as he involuntarily retreated several dozen steps. Countless cracks appeared on the golden mountain as he retreated. You little bastard. I'll make you pay a heavy price. Even if my cultivation drops to the initial stage of the Earthly Immortal Realm, I'll still kill you. He Wushang was extremely depressed when he noticed that his cultivation had dropped to the intermediate stage of the Earthly Immortal Realm. He roared towards the sky, causing his hair to flutter while his eyes were completely crimson red. He Wushang bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood essence onto the 100 weapons. After that, he suddenly slapped the end of the 100 weapons with his right hand. Swoosh! The 100 weapons suddenly shot out explosively like an invisible shuttle. Everywhere they passed, space warped and formed a strange vacuum. Zhuan stared at the 100 weapons that shot over explosively, and his expression was extremely unsightly. He immediately withdrew his earthly immortal saint artifacts, the immortal culling sword and 5 animal seal. He'd placed these 2 earthly immortal saint artifacts in the Fushi cauldron for over 20 breaths of time. Now, the aura of these 2 saint artifacts had far surpassed ordinary earthly immortal saint artifacts. Green energy sprayed out from the 5 animal seal and formed into the form of a tiger, a deer, a bear, an ape, and a bird. On the other hand, the immortal culling sword tore through space and drew numerous formidable sword images in the sky. Bang! Bang! Bang. Unfortunately, the 100 weapons were truly too terrifying and unstoppable at this moment. At the instant the 100 weapons came into contact with the immortal culling sword and 5 animal seal, a vast force swept out explosively, and then the immortal culling sword and 5 animal seal collapsed. Zhuan's eyes narrowed and his heart ached. It was truly a pity that 2 earthly immortal saint artifacts had been destroyed just like that. However, now was not the time for him to feel heartache. He bent his right finger and used all 3 celestial techniques in one breath. Under the boost of the energy of Tao insights, the might of these 3 immortal arts was extremely formidable. Unfortunately, it was still insufficient before the 100 soldiers at this moment, and the 3 immortal arts merely obstructed the 100 soldiers for a short moment before being directly blasted into powder. Break! In the end, the 100 weapons arrived in front of Zhuan. Zhuan suddenly punched out and unleashed his perfect saint body to the extreme. His fist smashed into the 100 weapons. Unfortunately, the 100 weapons were too terrifying. Zhuan's fist seemed to have smashed into an incomparably huge mountain. Then, his fist was directly distorted, and he spat out a mouthful of blood as he flew backward. "On your dead meat." He Wushang's eyes were filled with madness as he stared fixedly at Zhuan, who was flying backward in the sky. Chapter 1845. King Blade's Saint Talisman. Zhuan was hesitant when he took out the scabbard. After all, he'd just obtained this strange scabbard, and he didn't know how to use it. He didn't know if the scabbard could block the 100 soldiers. But he had no other choice. Besides the mysterious eyeball, he only had the strange scabbard. The mysterious eyeball was too mysterious, and Zhuan didn't want to use it often. Moreover, the mysterious eyeball was playing dead. He'd called out to it before, but it still showed no signs of waking up. At the instant he withdrew the sword sheath, Zhuan revealed a resolute expression as he suddenly tossed the sword sheath towards the soldiers that were flashing over, whereas, his right foot was enhanced by Tao insight, and he was prepared to flee at any moment. Clang! The 100 soldiers instantly flew over and collided with the surface of the scabbard. A clear sound of collision resounded. Then Zhuan noticed that the ordinary scabbard seemed to have been stimulated by something. The entire scabbard was trembling incessantly, and the bloodstains on the scabbard's surface surged with a blazing bloody glow. The instant the bloody glow erupted, the weight of the scabbard instantly increased by countless times. The 100 soldiers that were originally on the surface of the scabbard trembled and were directly sent flying by the scabbard. Zhuan's eyes flickered when the scabbard was sent flying. He stomped his right foot on the ground and threw the scabbard once more. This time, he threw the scabbard directly at He Wushang below. At this moment, He Wushang was shocked. He didn't hesitate to drop his cultivation as the price to forcefully raise the 100 soldiers, but they were actually so easily blasted away by the inconspicuous scabbard. This was truly inconceivable. He Wushang howled when he saw the scabbard flying over once more. He summoned the 100 soldiers back with one hand, and then he flicked his right hand towards the scabbard that was flying over. Bang! He Wushang's pupils constricted to the size of needles when the scabbard came into contact with the scabbard. An enormous force spread from the 100 soldiers to Zhuan's right hand, and then the 100 soldiers flew out of his hand. He Wushang's right hand exploded with clouds of blood, and he grunted as he retreated repeatedly. Zhuan's eyes lit up. He stomped his right foot on the ground and arrived before the 100 soldiers that had flown out of his hand and grabbed them. At the same time, the scabbard continued to fly towards He Wushang like a hot knife through butter. At this moment, He Wushang's face was completely pale. The scabbard was truly too strange. Even Wushang's Wushang was. Even his 100 soldiers had been blasted away, and his right hand was indirectly crippled. He Wushang his right hand studio. Let's go! He Wushang reluctantly looked at the soldiers that Zhuan had taken away. He bit the tip of his tongue without hesitation and spat out a mouthful of blood. This mouthful of blood immediately exploded into countless blood threads that wrapped around He Wushang. He Wushang, who was wrapped in countless strands of blood, disappeared like a bolt of lightning. He was so fast that he was almost as fast as a true immortal. The scabbard hit the ground, and the entire pool shook a few times. Then the scabbard smashed a huge hole in the ground. Zhuo Wen flew to the edge of the hole in the scabbard. He looked silently at He Wushang, who had disappeared, with a thoughtful expression. He Wushang is indeed an expert at the peak of the Sky Immortal realm. Even though his cultivation has dropped so much, he is still so hard to kill. Zhuan sighed. Zhuan had used all his skills in the battle just now, but he was still unable to kill He Wushang, who was already injured. It could be seen that He Wushang was indeed hard to kill. However, Zhuan also knew that He Wushang had paid a heavy price. After all, He Wushang did not hesitate to drop his cultivation again in order to forcefully increase the power of the 100 soldiers. He Wushang, whose cultivation had dropped to the early stage of the Sky Immortal realm, was no longer a threat to Zhuan. If Zhuan met He Wushang again in the underground maze, he would be able to kill him. The moment He Wushang left this place, the strange beast in the small pool suddenly leapt up and swept toward Zhuo Wen's back. "I've been paying attention to you for a long time." Zhuo Wen sneered. He grabbed the mysterious eyeball, which was pretending to be dead, and threw it at the strange beast behind him. The mysterious eyeball was extremely restrained by the strange beast's head between Kong Wen's eyebrows. Now that the real strange beast had appeared, it would probably be subdued as well. After being thrown out, the mysterious eyeball hissed at Zhuan in dissatisfaction. However, it soon noticed the strange beast in front of it, and its eyes revealed an extremely human-like joy. The mysterious eyeball blinked, and a black bolt of lightning shot out at an extremely fast speed. After the strange beast saw the mysterious eyeball clearly, its eyes revealed a look of fear. It immediately turned around and tried to escape into the pool. Unfortunately, the black bolt of lightning was too fast, and the strange beast's change of direction took too much time. Hence, the strange beast didn't even have time to react before the black bolt of lightning enveloped it. A sorrowful cry rang out, and Zhuan was shocked to discover that the strange beast had exploded into countless pieces of flesh and blood under the black bolt of lightning. Furthermore, the flesh and blood were all absorbed into nothingness by the black bolt of lightning. After the black bolt of lightning returned to the mysterious eyeball, it revealed a satisfied look and returned to Zhuo Wen's collar. What is the origin of this mysterious eyeball? Why is it so effective against this strange beast? Zhuan looked at the mysterious eyeball lying in his collar quietly. He increasingly felt that this mysterious eyeball was inextricably linked to the depths of Heavenly Armor Planet. Zhuan also felt that the strange beast that had appeared from Zhan Bai's head had something to do with the depths of Heavenly Armor Planet. This strange beast came out from Zhan Bai's head. It seems like this strange beast has been in Zhan Bai's head for a very long time, like a parasite, Xiao He said gravely in his mind. A parasite? Zhuo Wen's eyes lit up. He seemed to have found some clues. Whether it was Kong Wen, the black and white giant, or the many figures in the space where the black and white giant was, they all had the mark of a strange beast between their eyebrows. Zhuan had a bold guess, and that was that the strange beast in the pool was a parasite-like existence. This parasite parasitized the host and relied on the host's flesh and blood to grow. It also controlled the host's behavior. Back then, Zhan Bai had been parasitized by such a parasite. Perhaps that was why Zhan Bai had chosen to self-destruct. After all, it wasn't easy to become a demigod. It wasn't worth it to sacrifice himself like that. However, if Zhan Bai had known about the existence of a parasite in his body and that the parasite was likely to eat away at his flesh and blood step by step and control his body, then it was understandable that he had chosen to self-destruct. Rather than being controlled like a puppet, it would be better to die a worthy death. However, unexpectedly, Zhan Bai's head luckily survived, and for some unknown reason, it fell into the depths of the small pool. The exotic beast hid in Zhan Bai's head, avoiding the calamity. Previously, Kong Wen had only released the shadow of a strange beast from his body. There was no actual body of the strange beast. The reason was probably because the parasite in Kong Wen's body wasn't very strong. Or rather, it wasn't complete. Hence, it could only fight as a shadow. It seems like there are more of these parasites deep underground. It seems like I'll have to be extra careful when I go deeper underground. Zhuan squinted his eyes. He was even more alert. He knew very well that if he were to be parasitized by such a parasite, he would most likely become a puppet. Thinking of that possibility, Juan couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. Juan shook his head. He then looked at the 100 weapons in his hand. His eyes suddenly became extremely hot. The 100 weapons were ascended holy weapons. To him, it was extremely precious. What was more precious was that the 100 weapons had the King Blade Saint Talisman attached to it. The King Blade Saint Talisman was extremely compatible with the 100 weapons. It could increase the power of the 100 weapons by several times or even dozens of times. Juan thought for a moment. He didn't plan to combine the King Blade Saint Talisman with the 100 weapons. Instead, he planned to combine the King Blade Saint Talisman with the Primitive Talisman. He knew that the more powerful the Primitive Talisman was, the more beneficial it would be to his comprehension ability and the growth of his cultivation. In particular, the combination of the 9 Saint Talismans could form a divine talisman that could help warriors comprehend the mysteries of the divine realm. Of course, the god realm in the legends of the Heavenly Armor Continent should be the demigod realm. After all, there had never been a real divine transformation realm elite in the Heavenly Armor Continent. However, even if it was the demigod realm, it was still very terrifying. After all, it was extremely difficult to become a demigod by oneself. It was almost unimaginable. Thinking of this, Juan put the 100 weapons into the Azure Dragon Palace. At the same time, he let his mind energy doppelganger refine the 100 weapons silently. He sat cross-legged and released his perfect saint body and blood immortal to protect him. If I combine the complete King Blade Saint Talisman with the Primitive Talisman, I wonder what will happen to the Primitive Talisman? Juan's eyes were burning. Then, he pointed his right hand between his eyebrows and took out the Primitive Talisman. The surface of the Primitive Talisman emitted a faint light. It was emitting a rich origin energy. Then, Juan slowly put the King Blade Saint Talisman close to the Primitive Talisman. The moment the King Blade Saint Talisman completely merged with the Primitive Talisman, it emitted a blazing light. Then, Juan felt an extremely rich origin energy escaping from the Primitive Talisman. It drilled into Juan's forehead. As the origin energy drilled into Juan's forehead, Juan's eyes saw a further path. He saw the true immortal realm. Then, following the true immortal realm, he began to touch the demigod realm. Juan's eyes revealed a look of understanding. Then, he slowly closed his eyes and began to silently feel the mysterious feeling brought by the origin energy. The blood immortal looked at the Primitive Talisman floating in front of Juan. Her eyes flashed. She slowly approached Juan's body. Then, she sat on the ground and silently felt the origin energy's aura. Then, she simply closed her eyes and began to cultivate. The origin energy could peek into the origin. It had unimaginable benefits for cultivation. During the process of merging the Primitive Talisman and the King Blade Saint Talisman, the origin energy that escaped was extremely rich. This was an extremely rare opportunity. How could the blood immortal let it go? Chapter 1846. Extortion. A few days later, the blood immortal opened his eyes. His eyes were full of joy. With the help of the origin energy, he could see further into the path of cultivation. Originally, the blood immortal's cultivation was at the peak of the earth immortal realm. Now that he felt the origin energy, although he couldn't directly become a sky immortal, he could see the path to becoming a sky immortal. He knew what to do. Next, when the time was right, the blood immortal would have no problem becoming a sky immortal. Boom! Just as the blood immortal was immersed in joy, an extremely terrifying aura suddenly burst out from around her. The blood immortal's body trembled as she was suddenly hit by this aura. Then she fell to the ground in a sorry state. She was in an extremely sorry state. Then the blood immortal looked at where the aura came from. He saw that Juan had opened his eyes. His eyes were shining like stars, and his aura was surging to the extreme. He was many times stronger than before. The blood immortal stared at Juan and trembled. He couldn't help but whisper, "Mid-stage sky immortal?" At this moment, the blood immortal was secretly complaining in her heart. Juan's cultivation had increased too quickly. Originally, she had planned to wait until her cultivation had far surpassed Zhuo Wen's, then she would leave Zhuo Wen in a carefree manner. But now, not only was Zhuo Wen's cultivation higher than his strength was also stronger than his. Moreover, Zhuo Wen's body also contained the origin energy from the origin talisman. He realized that he was really reluctant to leave Zhuo Wen. After all, the reason why the Blood Immortal was able to cultivate so quickly was largely due to Zhuo Wen. If it wasn't for Zhuo Wen's great fortune and continuous fortuitous encounters, the Blood Immortal wouldn't have been able to reach this level. Although Zhuo Wen had removed the slave seal on the Blood Immortal, if the Blood Immortal just left Zhuo Wen like this, he would still feel uncomfortable. Zhuo Wen's face was radiant. The origin energy provided by the complete King Blade's Saint Talisman was too rich. After absorbing most of the origin energy, Zhuo Wen's cultivation base naturally advanced to the middle stage of Heaven Immortal. Although it was extremely difficult to reach the Sky Immortal realm, Zhuo Wen was different. With the origin energy, he had peeked into all realms below the demigod realm. In other words, the Sky Immortal realm and True Immortal realm were no bottlenecks for Zhuo Wen. The only obstacle was the accumulation of immortal essence. As long as Zhuo Wen could accumulate enough immortal essence, he could break through the immortal realm. Zhuo Wen's origin energy from the King Blade's Saint Talisman and turned it into immortal essence. Immortal essence, immortal realm. However, the origin energy was really limited. After pushing Zhuo Wen's cultivation base to the intermediate Heaven Immortal stage, it was completely consumed. In order to advance to the later stage of the Heaven Immortal realm, the amount of celestial core power or origin energy needed would increase exponentially. Currently, Zhuo Wen was unable to collect such a huge amount of celestial core power for his breakthrough. Even the immortal crystals in his spiritual ring were not enough. It seems like I'll need at least 1,000,000 immortal crystals or a complete Saint Talisman origin energy to advance to the late-stage Heaven Immortal realm. Zhuo Wen narrowed his eyes and thought of Wei Wuyin of the Beast Envoy clan. This old guy had colluded with He Wushang in the beginning and wanted to kill Zhuo Wen. Moreover, Zhuo Wen had also killed Wei Rui and had a deep grudge with Wei Wuyin. Even if Zhuo Wen did not look for Wei Wuyin would probably look for Zhuo Wen. Before Zhuo Wen got most of the topographic maps from Songjie, Zhuo Wen didn't have such an idea. But now, with the topographic maps and a general understanding of the topography of the underground, he dared not only to think about it, but also to do it. With that, Zhuo Wen stomped his right foot and left the exit of the passage. Zhuo Wen put away the Blood Immortal and the Perfect Saint Being. The underground maze was very large. Zhuo Wen knew the approximate range of the underground maze and some dangerous places. Zhuo Wen also knew the exit of the underground maze. However, Zhuo Wen did not plan to go out now. Instead, he deliberately went to some dangerous places in the underground maze. Maybe he could meet Shiji or the Master of the Tomb God in the underground maze. Of course, if he met Wei Wuyin or He Wushang, Zhuo Wen would be more than happy. The underground labyrinth was surrounded by thick rock ramparts. These rock ramparts were scattered all over the place and rotated clockwise. If one were to casually walk in the direction of these rock ramparts, it would be easy to walk into a dead end or even fall into an extremely dangerous trap. Zhuo Wen flashed through the underground labyrinth again and again. Unfortunately, there were no cultivators in the dangerous places he went. At the corner of a rock wall, there was a large area of quicksand. The quicksand inside was constantly flowing, forming a whirlpool in the center. The whirlpool contained a terrifying suction force. If one accidentally entered the range of the whirlpool, one would definitely be sucked into the whirlpool. At this moment, a huge black coffin was deeply embedded in the quicksand. Due to the huge suction force in the center of the quicksand, the black coffin was constantly floating toward the center of the whirlpool. It would not be long before it was completely sucked into the center of the whirlpool. Not far behind the black coffin, another figure had also sunk into the quicksand. This person's situation was much better than the black coffin's. He was quite far away from the whirlpool, and his celestial origin energy was exceptionally powerful, so his floating speed was quite slow. Zhuo Wen stopped 500 feet away from the quicksand and silently looked at the black coffin and the figure in the quicksand. According to the information given by Songjie, This quicksand was called the soul-devouring quicksand. Its suction force was so strong that it could suck in any warrior below the genuine immortal realm. Once someone was sucked into the whirlpool in the center of the soul-devouring quicksand, his soul would be swallowed and his body would be buried under the quicksand, becoming nutrients for the quicksand. Zhuan was no stranger to the black coffin and the figure. They were the first corpse king of the serene corpse extremity and Kong Lianxuan, the ancestor of the blood sacrifice clan. The first corpse king and Kong Lianxuan also noticed Zhuowen, who was 150 feet away. The two of them both revealed astonished expressions. They didn't think that the place Zhuowen stood just happened to be outside the range of the soul-devouring quicksand's terrifying suction force. Was it a fluke? Kong Lianxuan took a deep look at Zhuowen and murmured in a low voice. The lid of the black coffin opened slightly, and a pair of dark eyes came out. They looked at Zhuowen, who was 500 feet away, with a bewildered expression. "Do the two of you need help?" Zhuowen said with a smile. The first corpse king said gloomily, "With just you? How can you help us? If you have the guts, take another step forward and let me see if you have the ability to help us." Kong Lianxuan was silent and looked at Zhuowen quietly. He was very clear that if Hun listened to the first corpse king and took a step forward, then this child would enter the range of the soul-devouring quicksand's suction force. At that time, he would be sucked in by the soul-devouring quicksand, and everything would be hopeless. "Sure." Zhuowen smiled faintly and took a step forward. His eyes coldly stared at Kong Lianxuan and the first corpse king, unmoving like a mountain. The first corpse king and Kong Lianxuan's pupils shrunk as they stared at Zhuowen, who was unmoving like a mountain, revealing an expression of disbelief. Zhuowen was clearly in the range of the soul-devouring quicksand's suction force. How could this child not be affected at all? "Take another 30 feet forward," the first corpse king said in a low voice. Zhuowen still had a smile on his face. He took a step forward and walked forward 30 feet in an extremely steady manner. He also clearly felt that powerful suction force, but Zhuowen was still unmoving like a mountain. The first corpse king and Kong Lianxuan both gasped, finally believing that Zhuowen was actually unaffected by the soul-devouring quicksand's suction force. "How did you do it?" Kong Lianxuan finally spoke. Zhuowen smiled faintly and said, "If the two of you feel that you don't need help, then I'll take my leave." As he spoke, Zhuowen turned around and left this place step by step. However, when Zhuowen was about to leave, the first corpse king said in a low voice, "Wait, we need your help. Can you tell us how to break free from the suction force here?" Zhuowen stopped his footsteps and said with a smile, "Sure, but do the two of you want me to tell you the method like this?" "What do you want?" Kong Lianxuan said in a low voice. "I want all the immortal crystals on you," Zhuowen said indifferently. The first corpse king's gaze was cold as he said coldly, "What a big tone, actually wanting all the immortal crystals on us. Are you worthy?" Zhuowen smiled and looked at the first corpse king with ridicule, and said, "This place is called the soul-devouring quicksand. Once someone is swallowed by that whirlpool, their soul won't enter the cycle of reincarnation and will be devoured into nothingness. Your bodies will also be buried at the bottom of the quicksand and become nutrients for the quicksand, never to see the light of day again. If the two of you want to be swallowed by this quicksand and become a lonely ghost, then I have nothing to say. Especially you, first corpse king. In less than an hour, you'll be swallowed by that whirlpool. Is immortal crystals more important than your life? I think the two of you should know better than me, right?" The first corpse king furrowed his brows, then pondered for a moment and said, "Sure, these are all the immortal crystals on me. Can you help me break free from this quicksand now?" As he spoke, the first corpse king waved his sleeve and directly threw out a storage pouch. Zhuowen caught the storage pouch and found that there were only 300,000 immortal crystals in this storage pouch. The corner of his mouth was full of a sneer as he said, "The first corpse king's reputation is illustrious, it shouldn't be this shabby, right? You think it's too little?" The first corpse king said coldly, "I want all the immortal crystals on you. You only have this one chance, or else don't blame me for not keeping my promise," Zhuowen said coldly. The first corpse king's expression froze. After a moment of silence, he threw out the storage pouch again. Zhuan checked it and found that there were 600,000 immortal crystals in this storage pouch. Adding the 300,000 from before as well as the 100,000 on Zhuan, he had around 1 million immortal crystals on him. Chapter 1847. Late stage of Sky Immortal. Unfortunately, 1 million immortal crystals was not enough for Zhuan to advance to late stage of Sky Immortal. According to his initial estimation, 1 million immortal crystals was just the foundation to advance to late stage of Sky Immortal. Perhaps he would need several million immortal crystals. 1 million immortal crystals was still too little for the current Zhuan. This is all the immortal crystals I have. Now help me get rid of this annoying quicksand. The first corpse king said gloomily. Zhuan smiled slightly. He took a step forward with his right foot and quickly approached the soul-devouring quicksand. In an instant, he entered the quicksand's range. Strangely, Zhuan was not affected by the terrifying suction force of the quicksand. Instead, he stepped on the air like a free bird. The reason why Zhuan was not affected by the suction force was that he knew the devouring principle of the soul-devouring quicksand from the information given by Cangjie. The soul-devouring quicksand was unimaginably sensitive to creatures with souls. Any creature that came within 500 feet of the soul-devouring quicksand would be affected by the powerful suction force emitted by the soul-devouring quicksand. If it was a dead creature, the soul-devouring quicksand would turn a blind eye to it. Knowing this principle, Zhuan completely sealed his sea of consciousness the moment he entered the soul-devouring quicksand. The soul aura inside did not escape at all. That was why the soul-devouring quicksand turned a blind eye to him. Zhuan naturally would not tell the first corpse king and Kong Lianshuan about this method. Zhuan rushed to the coffin of the first corpse king and slammed his right palm on the coffin. A powerful palm force was transmitted, causing the first corpse king's coffin to suddenly fly up. Afterwards, Zhuan suddenly kicked with his right foot. The powerful force directly kicked the coffin away, and the first corpse king, who was inside the coffin, let out a muffled groan. Clearly, the impact had quite a bit of effect on him. When the black coffin flew out 150 meters, the black coffin directly exploded. The first corpse king who was inside the coffin appeared outside in a rather wretched state. He stared at Zhuan coldly and said, "You did this on purpose?" The first corpse king's entire body was pitch black, like a dried corpse that had been exposed to the sun for thousands of years. Even his eyes were incomparably empty. In those empty eyes, two strange black flames burned. I accidentally used a bit more strength. It was unintentional. Zhuan said indifferently. Zhuan was very clear that the first corpse king wasn't a good person. He extorted 900,000 immortal crystals from the first corpse king. The first corpse king definitely wouldn't let it go. Therefore, when rescuing this first corpse king, his methods naturally wouldn't be so gentle. The first corpse king's eyes were filled with killing intent. He stared fixedly at Zhuan, then leaned against a nearby cliff and said, "Little bastard, this corpse king's immortal crystals aren't so easy to take." At this moment, Kong Lianshuan 2. Zhuan S. Not far away, the first corpse king's face stiffened. He coldly stared at Kong Lianshuan and said in a low voice, "Kong Lianshuan, what do you mean?" Kong Lianshuan did not pay attention to the first corpse king at all. He only looked at Zhuan indifferently, as if waiting for Zhuan's reply. Zhuan shook his head. Kong Lianshuan's face immediately darkened, and he said, "Zhuan, if you don't have my help, it won't be that easy to get rid of the first corpse king. You better think carefully." Zhuan still shook his head. Kong Lianshuan's face became even more unsightly. He coldly snorted and took out a storage pouch from his spirit ring. He threw it to Zhuan and said, "I hope you don't regret it." Zhuan sized up the storage pouch Kong Lianshuan gave him. He discovered that there were no less than 1,500,000 immortal crystals inside, making his eyes light up. Silently putting away these immortal crystals, Zhuan continued, "Senior Kong, other than the immortal crystals, I also want the blood sacrifice holy symbol on you. When the time comes, I will naturally help you get out." Kong Lianshuan felt that he misheard, and hastily asked, "What did you just say?" "I also want the blood sacrifice holy symbol." Zhuowen said indifferently. Boom. A vast aura suddenly erupted from Kong Lianxuan's body. Under the influence of this aura, the surrounding quicksand actually all soared into the sky, forming a terrifying sandstorm. You're going too far. Kong Lianxuan roared at Zhuowen. Zhuowen stomped his right foot and dodged the surrounding quicksand. He looked at Kong Lianxuan indifferently and said, Senior Kong, the more you struggle in this soul-devouring quicksand, the more terrifying the suction force from inside will be. If you don't have my help, you will undoubtedly die. You better think carefully. After Kong Lianxuan recovered his senses, he indeed discovered that the surrounding suction force was becoming more and more terrifying. He quickly restrained the aura that erupted from his body. He stared at Zhuowen and said, You're too greedy. This blood sacrifice holy symbol is my blood sacrifice clan's inheritance for 10,000 years. How can I give it away just like that? Is your life more important or the holy symbol more important? Senior Kong, think carefully. Zhuowen crossed his arms and looked at Kong Lianxuan indifferently. Time slowly passed. After an hour, Kong Lianxuan was only a few feet away from the vortex. In less than 10 breaths of time, Kong Lianxuan would be completely swallowed by the vortex. At this moment, Kong Lianxuan finally experienced the crisis of life and death. Looking at the incomparably deep vortex, his forehead was covered in cold sweat. I'll hand over the blood sacrifice holy symbol. Kong Lianxuan hastily said. Zhuowen stared at Kong Lianxuan without any action. This made Kong Lianxuan secretly curse Zhuowen's cunning. Helpless, he tapped his forehead and took out the blood sacrifice holy symbol from his sea of consciousness and threw it to Zhuowen. In the face of his clan's inheritance and his life, Kong Lianxuan ultimately chose his life. Receiving the blood sacrifice holy symbol, Zhuowen's eyes were bright and full of expression. He could feel the dense origin energy within the blood sacrifice holy symbol. As long as he absorbed this blood sacrifice holy symbol, coupled with the immortal crystals on his body, he could completely reach the late stage of the sky immortal realm. Why aren't you saving me? Looking at the vortex close at hand, Kong Lianxuan hastily shouted. Zhuowen's right hand formed a claw and suddenly grabbed Kong Lianxuan's collar, lifting him upside down. Kong Lianxuan's face flushed red. Zhuowen's posture of lifting him was too shameful. It was as if he was carrying trash and didn't care about his feelings at all. When they were within 500 feet, Zhuowen suddenly swung and directly threw Kong Lianxuan out. Kong Lianxuan's feet repeatedly stepped in the void. Terrifying immortal essence gushed out, and many ripples emerged under his feet. After that, he steadily stopped not far from the first corpse king, and his eyes were filled with killing intent, staring fixedly at Zhuowen who was opposite him. Little bastard, you better not come out. Once you come out, I'll definitely pull out your tendons, peel off your bones, and let you die in pain. Kong Lianxuan roared as if he had almost lost his reason. The first corpse king on the other hand was laughing gloatingly on the side. After Kong Lianxuan recovered his reason, the first corpse king said, This little bastard has guts. He actually tricked both of us. He really doesn't know how to restrain himself. After this kid comes out, how about you and I compete to see who will kill this kid first? Kong Lianxuan glanced at the first corpse king indifferently and said indifferently, This kid will definitely be killed by me. You have no chance. As he spoke, Kong Lianxuan came to the other side and sat cross-legged on the ground, silently waiting. The first corpse king shrugged, then raised his head to look at Zhuowen. The corner of his mouth revealed a cruel smile. Zhuowen glanced at Kong Lianxuan and the first corpse king indifferently, the corner of his mouth full of a sneer. No matter if it was Kong Lianxuan or the first corpse king, both of their strengths had reached the peak of the sky immortal realm. With Zhuowen's current strength, he might be able to contend against one of them. But with both of them attacking together, even Zhuowen would find it somewhat difficult. So, Zhuowen wasn't in a hurry to leave the soul-devouring quicksand. Instead, he planned to absorb the blood sacrifice holy symbol and immortal crystal to break through to the late stage of the sky immortal realm. This way, he would have a much greater chance of breaking through the siege of the first corpse king and Kong Lianxuan. Although Zhuowen had the mysterious scabbard, and if he used the mysterious scabbard, He could break through Kong Lianxuan and the First Corpse King. However, he wasn't sure that he could kill the two of them. So, he didn't plan to expose the mysterious scabbard. And the underground maze was extremely complicated and mysterious. Without knowing anything, no one could find the exit of the underground maze so quickly. Unless they knew the terrain of the underground maze in advance like Jun, then it would be possible to do so. So, Jun wasn't in a hurry. Jun casually found a place at the edge of the soul-devouring quicksand, then sat cross-legged. At the same time, he took out the blood sacrifice holy symbol and took out the primitive talisman. Using the primitive talisman's ability, he began to absorb the original power of the blood sacrifice holy symbol. While Zhuan was absorbing the blood sacrifice holy symbol, the blood immortal hiding in the spirit ring kept howling. Zhuan frowned and released the blood immortal. After reminding her about the characteristics of the soul-devouring quicksand, the blood immortal sat beside Zhuan and absorbed the original power that was escaping from the surroundings. Looking at the greedy look of the blood immortal, Zhuan frowned slightly, but didn't say anything. Instead, he began to use the primitive talisman to absorb the blood sacrifice holy symbol. Kong Lianxuan, who was outside the soul-devouring quicksand, naturally noticed this scene. Especially after seeing the blood sacrifice holy symbol, his face became extremely ugly. What is this kid doing? It seems like he's absorbing the blood sacrifice holy symbol? The First Corpse King was shocked and doubtful. Kong Lianxuan just noticed Zhuan's actions. He carefully looked at the primitive talisman in front of Zhuan. He seemed to have guessed something, and his pupils shrank to the size of needles. Kong Lianxuan frowned and murmured in a low voice, "This kid? It's impossible. This kid can't know this method." Time passed by slowly. After about 10 days, the primitive talisman finally absorbed all of the blood sacrifice holy symbol. The original power of the blood sacrifice holy symbol poured into Zhuan's body, causing the aura in his body to expand to an extremely terrifying level. It's still a little bit away from the late stage of the fairy immortal realm. It seems like the original power of a complete holy symbol is still not enough. Zhuan murmured in a low voice. He waved his sleeve and immediately took out glittering and translucent immortal crystals from the spirit ring. The immortal crystals exploded into balls of extremely rich immortal core power. The immortal core power turned into a mist that surrounded Zhuan. Then, the immortal core power mist drilled into Zhuan's meridians. As the immortal core power mist drilled into Zhuan's meridians, the aura in Zhuan's body expanded infinitely. Chapter 1848. Clashwhoosh. When Zhuan's aura burst out, the countless grains of sand within the soul-devouring quicksand came to a standstill. Moreover, these grains of sand were like ancient beasts as they suddenly rose up, forming an inverted quicksand waterfall. The terrifying suction force in the soul-devouring quicksand also stopped for a moment when the powerful aura burst out. The First Corpse King and Kong Lianxuan stood up abruptly. Their eyes were wide open and their faces were full of shock. Kong Lianxuan said with a gloomy look, "Late Sky Immortal Realm? When did this kid's cultivation advance so quickly?" Whether it was the First Corpse King or Kong Lianxuan, both of them felt incredulous. When they were in the chess world where the black and white giant were, Zhuan was someone that many experts had overlooked. Because at that time, Zhuan's cultivation was only at the late Earth Immortal Realm. Anyone present could pinch him to death with a finger. If it wasn't for Zhuan relying on the first mountain god, Shiji, and the Lord of the Divine Tomb, he wouldn't have been able to live until now. But now, not long after the chess world was broken, this kid's cultivation had already reached the Sky Immortal Realm. Moreover, he was breaking through to the late Sky Immortal Realm. This cultivation speed was really unbelievable. How did he do it? There's a huge gap between the Earth Immortal Realm and the Sky Immortal Realm. Without more than 1,000 years of accumulation, how could he have succeeded? The First Corpse King took a deep breath and murmured. Kong Lianxuan's eyes were gloomy. He stared at the origin talisman between Zhuan's eyebrows. He thought more clearly than the First Corpse King. After all, he had held the blood sacrifice saint talisman for countless years and was extremely sensitive to the aura of the saint talisman. He felt the aura of the Ice Flame, Wind Thunder, and King's Blade Saint Talisman in the Origin Talisman. Among them, the King's Blade Saint Talisman's aura was the strongest. It was almost the same as his Blood Sacrifice Saint Talisman. Could it be that He Wushang's King's Blade Saint Talisman was also taken by this kid? Kong Lianxuan murmured gloomily. But soon his gloominess was replaced by enthusiasm. He never thought that Zhuan would be able to fuse several Saint Runes at the same time. Moreover, the fusion of these Saint Runes could bring such great benefits to cultivators. Kong Lianxuan was very clear that the reason Zhuan was able to advance so quickly was closely related to the Holy Talisman. As long as he obtained the Origin Talisman in Zhuan's body, then he might be able to directly break through the peak of the heavenly immortal realm and become a true immortal. First Corpse King, how about the two of us join hands to capture this boy? Kong Lianxuan suddenly said to the First Corpse King beside him. The First Corpse King's eyes narrowed slightly. He naturally noticed the fanaticism in Kong Lianxuan's eyes just now, and then he noticed the Origin Talisman in front of Zhuan. Although he didn't recognize the Origin Talisman, he could guess that the reason why this kid's cultivation advanced so quickly was inseparable from the Origin Talisman. The First Corpse King sneered repeatedly. How could he not guess Kong Lianxuan's thoughts? But he didn't point it out. After all, there was no need for the two of them to fall out right now. Everything would be discussed after capturing that Zhuan first. It's my honor. The First Corpse King sneered. At this moment, above the soul-devouring quicksand, Zhuan suddenly opened his eyes, and a terrifying light burst out from his eyes. The late stage of the heavenly immortal realm not only gave him more powerful immortal energy than the mid-stage of the heavenly immortal realm, but also a deeper understanding of the three immortal techniques in his body. No matter if it was the slaughtering finger of the underworld or the Buddha demon transformation, they were all the strongest moves of the peak of the true immortal realm. The power of these two immortal techniques far surpassed the other immortal techniques, and could be considered Zhuan's strongest moves. Slowly turning around, Zhuan's gaze fell on the First Corpse King and Kong Lianxuan outside. Then he took a step forward, and the aura on his body suddenly erupted. Seeing Zhuan's action, the First Corpse King and Kong Lianxuan's eyes narrowed, but soon the First Corpse King sneered and said, "Brat who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, you think you have the power to fight against the two of us after breaking through to the late stage of the heavenly immortal realm? Wishful thinking." Zhuan stepped forward step by step, and the aura on his body became more and more terrifying. It was as if countless volcanoes erupted around his body, sweeping out countless upside-down terrifying cyclones. At the same time, Zhuan pointed his right hand at the void, and the terrifying immortal energy flowed along his fingertip and suddenly erupted forward. Then, an incomparably vast mountain fell from the sky. The lone peak doesn't stand alone with the other mountains, and it goes straight into the clouds without stopping. When the lone peak crushed down, Zhuan took a step forward, and his right foot was like the wind, and heavily kicked the surface of the lone peak. Rumble! Suddenly, the lone peak was like a desolate giant beast, and it charged forward violently. Its power was so terrifying that it seemed to be able to crush all living things into powder. Originally, the First Corpse King and Kong Lianxuan didn't care too much, but the moment the lone peak rushed towards them, their faces suddenly became much more solemn. Yin Corpse Curse. The First Corpse King's gaze was solemn, and his right hand formed a seal and pointed out. Suddenly, a rather powerful and vast Yin Qi swept out between his fingers. This Yin Qi transformed into countless Yin corpses and immediately blocked in front of the lone peak. Kong Lianxuan also made his move. His right hand formed a claw, and at some unknown time, strange bloody marks actually appeared on his palm. These bloody marks constantly intertwined in his palm. With a claw, the bloody marks wriggled, and an incomparably huge bloody claw was reflected in front of him. With endless slaughter and blood, it heavily slammed on the lone peak. Rumble! The First Corpse King and Kong Lianxuan's attacks followed one after another, and heavily landed on the lone peak. Immediately after, the lone peak's forward momentum stopped, and a series of muffled explosive sounds continuously resounded on the surface of the lone peak. Zhuan's gaze was overflowing with battle intent. His right hand pointed again, and an even more terrifying immortal energy swept out, and all gathered into the lone peak. Then, the lone peak suddenly expanded, and instantly expanded dozens of times, reaching through the sky and the earth, and there was no end in sight. Rumble! Suddenly, the Een corpse curse and the bloody claw directly collapsed. The lone peak was like a hot knife through butter, and suddenly swept in front of the first corpse king and Kong Lianshuan. Kong Lianshuan and the first corpse king's face were gloomy. This Zhuan had just advanced to the late stage of the heavenly immortal realm, but he could actually unleash such a powerful strength. It was beyond their expectations. No need to hold back, get rid of him, Kong Lianshuan said in a deep voice. His right foot stepped forward, and his entire person swept out like an arrow leaving the bow. At the same time, he flicked his right hand and immediately took out an iron umbrella. The surface of this umbrella emitted an extremely terrifying aura. Zhuan stared at this umbrella, and his pupils shrunk slightly. He knew that this umbrella must be a heavenly saint artifact. In addition, the first corpse king also grabbed with his right hand, and countless death chi surged out from the first corpse king's body, and finally condensed into a long scythe in his hand. Slash! The first corpse king followed closely behind Kong Lianshuan. He waved the long scythe in his right hand, and suddenly slashed out. A huge saber chi swept out violently, and around this saber chi were countless soul shadows. Kong Lianshuan's eyes were even more dignified. He held the iron umbrella in his right hand, and suddenly spun it, and a surge of celestial core power poured into the iron umbrella. Suddenly, the iron umbrella flew into the sky, and transformed into countless umbrella shadows. Countless umbrella shadows densely covered the surroundings, and finally condensed into a huge umbrella shadow that was hundreds of feet long. The umbrella shadow was covered with terrifying spikes, and when it spun, it was like a gear that made a strange creaking sound. With two heavenly saint artifacts, no matter how powerful the lone peak was, it would still collapse inch by inch. At this moment, Zhuan had already swept out of the range of the Soul Eater quicksand, and his perfect divine body had completely merged with his original body. Celestial Art asked Buddha. The moment Zhuan swept out of the Soul Eater quicksand, his figure did not stop at all. His right foot stepped on the void, and his whole body spun like a whirlwind. In the air, he put his palms together, and his whole body shone with Buddha's light. The surging Buddha's light wrapped Zhuan's whole body, and then a huge ancient Buddha shadow appeared in the void behind of Zhuan. Break! The first corpse king and Kong Lianshuan's eyes narrowed, and they snorted coldly. They both held their respective heavenly saint artifacts, and used their own powerful moves to attack Zhuan. Boom! Under the control of Zhuan, the ancient Buddha shadow suddenly stretched out its right palm, and slapped out. The surrounding space collapsed, and only the endless Buddha's light was left. Bang! The ancient Buddha phantom shone with Buddhist light. Unfortunately, Kong Lianshuan and the first corpse king's teamwork was not something to be trifled with. The ancient Buddha phantom did not persist for too long, and its surface was filled with dense cracks, finally collapsing with a loud bang. Zhuan's eyes were as cold as a demon's. The seal on his right hand changed again, and endless demon chi burst out from his body, and his whole body was surrounded by demon chi, like a big demon. Clang! Zhuan grabbed with both hands, and the demon chi was monstrous, condensing into two demon swords. Zhuan threw out both swords, and faced the first corpse king and Kong Lianshuan. Bang! 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 The three of them suddenly exchanged dozens of moves, and each move made an extremely dull sound. Terrifying sparks constantly poured out from the three of them, and it looked extremely dazzling. How is this kid's physical body so strong? The first corpse king's pupils shrank slightly. Every time the two of them exchanged blows with Zhuan, the terrifying tremors produced were enough to injure Zhuan quite a bit. However, Zhuan's expression did not change during the battle, as if he was scratching an itch. After all, his physical body had reached the perfect saint physique, and just the aftermath of the battle could not have any effect on Zhuan. Immortal Technique, Corpse King Burial. Immortal Technique, Blood Sea World. The first Corpse King and Kong Lianchuan put away any of their previous contempt. They looked at each other and no longer held back and used their strongest immortal techniques. The first Corpse King's right sword finger pointed at the void, and then the long scythe slashed out horizontally. The space in front of it suddenly collapsed, and in the collapsed cave, a huge shadow slowly appeared. The shadow had a head full of gray hair, and the fangs in its mouth were exposed. Its eyes were pitch black, and its whole body was filled with death chi. Kong Lianchuan spat out a mouthful of blood essence. The moment the blood essence was spat out, it expanded infinitely and finally turned into a boundless sea of blood. Chapter 1849. Crushing Bang. 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 Zhuowen's demonic aura swirled around his body as he crossed his demonic sabers and slashed out. Instantly, a monstrous demonic aura condensed into a huge intersecting saber shadow that soared into the sky. The blood sea surged and rushed over. The huge Corpse King phantom stepped on the blood sea, and in the Corpse King's mouth was a broken sword. Seeing the saber shadow approaching, the Corpse King stretched out his right hand and took out the broken sword in his mouth. He slashed out fiercely, and a soaring sword shadow condensed and shot out like an arrow from a bow. The sword shadow soared through the sky, and wherever it passed, the sea of blood soared into the sky. It brought with it a bloody aura as it landed heavily on the intersecting saber shadow. Bang! The intersecting saber shadow did not last for long and was directly shattered by the sword shadow. Then, it continued to rush forward. Zhuowen's pupils shrank. He took a deep breath and formed a seal with both hands. Suddenly, an extremely blazing Buddha's light erupted from his body that was filled with demonic aura. Buddha Demon Transformation. After saying that, the Buddha's light in Zhuowen's body became even more blazing. In the end, it fought against the demonic aura around him. His body was half Buddha and half demon. It was both Buddha and demon, and it looked extremely strange. Zhuowen held the devil saber in one hand and the Buddhist commandment blade in the other. He rushed out like a shuttle, riding the wind and breaking the waves. Bang! Zhuowen's saber slashed at the sword shadow. His body paused for a moment, then he twisted his waist and directly shattered the sword shadow. Then he rushed directly into the depths of the sea of blood. Stop him! Kong Lianchuan's eyes were dark. After using the Buddha Demon Transformation, Zhuowen's strength had increased by too much. He actually gave Kong Lianchuan a sense of threat. Thinking of this, Kong Lianchuan took a deep breath and formed a seal with both hands again. The sea of blood immediately surged like a raging beast. Zhuowen, who had rushed into the sea of blood, started to spin. The Buddha's light and demonic aura intersected, forming a black-gold storm that shuttled through the sea of blood like a hot knife through butter. The huge Corpse King's eyes flashed coldly. With the broken sword in his hand, he dove into the sea of blood and pounced toward Zhuowen. Slash! Zhuowen, who had the body of the Buddha demon and a perfect holy body, was full of fighting spirit. He had no intention of dodging the phantom of the Corpse King. As the two approached each other, Zhuowen brandished the Buddhist commandment blade in his right hand and fiercely chopped the broken sword in the phantom corpse's hand. Bang bang bang! A terrifying power spread out, and countless terrifying water vortexes began to sweep out from the bottom of the blood sea. These water vortexes were like angry dragons, constantly sweeping out, causing endless tsunamis to rise in the blood sea. At the moment when the Buddhist commandment blade collided with the broken sword, Zhuowen decisively threw out the devil saber in his left hand. The demonic saber turned into a beam of dim light, shuttling through the countless whirlpools in the blood sea, heading straight for the glabella of the Corpse King. The Corpse King's phantom did not expect that Zhuowen would suddenly use this move. He was stunned on the spot. Then, the demonic blade moved as fast as a shuttle and instantly pierced through the Corpse King's forehead. Rumble! The Corpse King did not even have time to react before his glabella was invaded by the demonic aura. Then, his entire body was surrounded by the demonic aura and finally collapsed. The moment the Corpse King's phantom collapsed, Zhuowen let out a muffled groan. A trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth, but he quickly suppressed it. Then he stepped out, following the rolling blood sea, and violently rushed out. After catching the demonic saber not far from the blood sea, Yuan combined the devil saber and the Buddhist commandment blade. The demonic light and Buddhist light combined to form a long saber that was about 10 feet long. The surface of the saber was covered with Buddhist light and demonic light. Buddha Demon Slash. Yuan, who was at the bottom of the blood sea, held the Buddha demon saber in his hand and swung it toward the sky. Suddenly, a saber shadow that seemed to be able to tear the endless void rushed out from the Buddha demon saber. This saber shadow was so huge that it was surrounded by demonic and Buddhist shadows. The Buddha demon blade's shadow appeared, and the sea of blood was directly cleaved into two halves, splitting from the middle. The blade's shadow rushed towards the first corpse king and Kong Lianxuan, while Zhuowen raised the Buddha demon blade and followed closely behind, staring coldly at the two above. This little bastard. The first corpse king and Kong Lianxuan's expression changed slightly at the same time. They looked at each other and held their ascended saint artifacts to meet the Buddha demon saber shadow that rushed toward the sky. The first corpse king stretched out his withered left hand and lightly touched the long scythe in his right hand. The long scythe's surface was emitting an extremely terrifying aura of death. Kong Lianxuan's immortal energy condensed on the iron umbrella. The iron umbrella suddenly expanded to several hundred feet. Then, under Kong Lianxuan's control, it suddenly swung downward. Countless white lights swept out like streaks of white hidden weapons. Bang! The first corpse king and Kong Lianxuan's all-out attack was extremely terrifying. Although the Buddha demon saber shadow was terrifying, under the two's joint attack, it still collapsed inch by inch. However, the first corpse king and Kong Lianxuan were not unharmed. After the two of them shattered the Buddha demon saber shadow, they groaned and retreated to the side. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He stomped his right foot and his speed instantly increased as he rushed toward the first corpse king. Between the first corpse king and Kong Lianxuan, the first corpse king's strength dropped a lot due to the broken coffin. Although Kong Lianxuan lost the blood sacrifice holy symbol, he still had the strength of a peak sky immortal. Seeing Zhuowen rushing toward him, the first corpse king's eyes flashed with a cold light. He roared angrily and slashed the long scythe in his hand, waving it toward Zhuowen. Slash! Zhuowen held the Buddha demon saber in his right hand and slashed down. It heavily blasted on the long scythe, and a terrifying air wave spread out from between the two. Zhuowen followed this powerful air wave and immediately separated the perfect saint body. The perfect saint body followed the gap in the air wave and instantly approached the first corpse king. He fiercely punched and heavily smashed the first corpse king's chest. The first corpse king did not expect Zhuowen to suddenly use this move, so he was not prepared at all. Then, Zhuowen directly took advantage of the gap and punched his chest, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, Zhuowen's original body stepped on the 7 stars and instantly rushed in front of the first corpse king. He slashed down. The first corpse king looked on helplessly as the blade chopped down on his head and directly split him into two. Zhuowen. At the same time, Kong Lianxuan behind him roared angrily and rushed toward Zhuowen. Zhuowen indifferently glanced at Kong Lianxuan behind him. The perfect saint body instantly merged with him. He once again slashed horizontally with his blade. This time, he used his strongest power at the moment. The moment the blade slashed out, Kong Lianxuan's expression changed greatly. He blocked in front of him with the iron umbrella. With a bang, the iron umbrella in Kong Lianxuan's hand was slashed away. Kong Lianxuan's clothes were all torn. He flew out and heavily smashed into the wall behind him. He stared at Zhuowen in fear. Kong Lianxuan's face was full of disbelief. This Zhuowen had just advanced to the late stage of Sky Immortal. Not only did he block the joint attack of 2 peak Sky Immortals, he even defeated them so cleanly. Zhuowen indifferently glanced at Kong Lianxuan and the first corpse king that was constantly squirming and starting to merge. He said indifferently, "Do you still want to kill me now?" At this moment, the first corpse king had completely merged his body that was split into 2. However, his aura was extremely weak. The blade just now had caused too much damage to him. The first corpse king tightly leaned against the rock wall. His gaze was extremely uneasy as he stared at Chun. That blade just now made him feel the feeling of death. Looking at the first corpse king and Kong Lianshuan, who were completely silent, Yuan sneered and said, "Still not scramming? If you dare to make a move next time, leave behind your worthless lives." Kong Lianshuan and the first corpse king's complexion alternated between green and white. In the end, they didn't dare to refute Zhuan. Instead, they left this place dejectedly. Zhuan indifferently looked at the two people who left. The reason why he didn't kill the first corpse king and Kong Lianshuan was naturally because these two people were not easy to kill. After all, these two people were peak sky immortals. They were experts who had been famous in Middle-earth for a long time. If they really fought with their lives on the line, they were bound to have powerful trump cards. At that time, Zhuan would probably have to pay a great price to kill these two people. Fighting with his life on the line in this underground maze that was filled with danger really wasn't a wise move. Not far from here, on the mottled rock wall path, two figures slowly walked. One of them had a face full of wrinkles. His eyes were filled with the color of death. His face was even paler and bloodless. This person was only around 40 years old, but he looked about the same as an old man in his 70s or 80s. The other person was around 30 to 40 years old. He had a sturdy build. In front of him was a hunting dog that was half the height of a person. It was constantly sniffing at something on the ground. "Brother Wei, are you sure you can find that little bastard Zhuan?" The man with a face full of wrinkles said with a gaze full of hatred. The middle-aged man glanced at the man with a face full of wrinkles. After a moment of silence, he said, "Brother He, don't worry. I'm quite familiar with Zhuowen's presence. This hunting dog is a manifestation of the beast envoy Saint Talisman. Its sense of smell is extremely sensitive. It can find the owner of the scent within 10,000 kilometers. If Zhuan was here, he would definitely be able to recognize these two people. Wasn't the man with a face full of wrinkles He Wushang, who was almost killed by Zhuan? At this moment, He Wushang's presence was extremely weak. His cultivation had fallen to the early sky immortal stage. All of this was thanks to Zhuan. Right now, He Wushang only wanted to find Zhuan and slowly torture him to death. The middle-aged man beside him was naturally Wei Wuyin of the Beast Envoy clan. The reason why Wei Wuyin helped He Wushang wasn't because of their good relationship, but because He Wushang had told him that Zhuan possessed the source energy formed by the fusion of several Saint Talismans. This kind of source energy was extremely precious to any cultivator. After all, it could allow one to peek into one's origin and know what to do in the future. This was especially true for celestial saints, as source energy was extremely important to them. After learning from He Wushang that Zhuan actually possessed such a thing, Wei Wuyin was naturally tempted. Woof! Suddenly, the hunting dog in front of him raised its head and barked. Immediately after, its eyes shone with a dim light and it suddenly flew forward. "Looks like there's a clue," Wei Wuyin said with a blazing gaze. The two of them followed closely behind the hunting dog. The moment they came to a corner, a figure suddenly rushed over. A terrifying aura surged out. The hunting dog let out a wail and was directly crushed by the aura and exploded. Wei Wuyin and He Wushang's expressions changed drastically. They hurriedly used their celestial origin energy to block in front of them and kept retreating. Swoosh! The figure was too fast and caught Wei Wuyin off guard. Before Wei Wuyin could even react, the figure had already arrived in front of He Wushang, who was not far away. "It's you?" He Wushang only had time to say these words before a large blade shrouded in black and gold slashed across He Wushang's neck. His head flew into the air. Then, He Wushang's entire body exploded into a cloud of blood mist. A powerful Buddha demon force invaded his body. The Yuan spirit in his dantian had no chance to escape and directly collapsed. As soon as He Wushang died, Wei Wuyin's pupils shrank and he hurriedly retreated. At the same time, he activated the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman and stared ahead. In the countless clouds of blood mist, a tall and straight young man stood proudly like a pine tree. The young man held He Wushang's head in his hand. Chapter 1850. This escape. How could Wei Wuyin and He Wuxiang compare to Zhuowen in terms of familiarity in the underground maze? When Wei Wuyin and He Wuxiang appeared nearby, Zhuowen had already sensed it. Therefore, he had been lying in ambush nearby. The moment the two of them approached, he would catch them off guard and kill He Wuxiang instantly. Wei Wuyin stared fixedly at Zhuowen and revealed a shocked expression. At this moment, Zhuowen's aura was extremely powerful. If he was not mistaken, Zhuowen's cultivation had already reached the late heaven immortal stage. If he didn't remember wrongly, Zhuowen's cultivation was merely at the advanced stage of the earthly immortal realm. Although He Wuxiang had reminded him that Zhuowen's cultivation had reached the early stage of the heavenly immortal realm, it was still at the early stage of the heavenly immortal realm. But now, Zhuowen's aura wasn't just at the early sky immortal stage, he was at the late sky immortal stage. In such a short period of time, his cultivation has broken through two minor realms. How did he do it? Wei Wuyin frowned slightly. He felt more and more that Zhuowen's aura was strange, but he quickly recalled what He Wuxiang had said to him before. This kid's rapid advancement is probably related to the origin energy. He's only at the late sky immortal stage, but I'm already at the peak of the sky immortal stage. Coupled with the beast envoy Saint Talisman, he's no match for me at all. Capture him and forcefully extract his origin energy. Wei Wuin's eyes suddenly blazed as he laughed heartily and said, "What a waste of effort. Tian, since you've delivered yourself to my doorstep, don't blame me for being impolite." With that, Wei Wuyin stomped his right foot and charged toward Zhuan. Zhuan glanced at Wei Wuyin indifferently, but he didn't fight Wei Wuyin directly. Instead, his figure flashed and he fled towards the back. Although Wei Wuyin was also at the peak of the sky immortal stage, he had the Saint Talisman on him and was stronger than Kong Lianxuan and the First Corpse King. It wasn't wise for Zhuan to fight him head-on. Wei Wuyin didn't doubt him. In his opinion, Zhuowen's cultivation was lower than his, so killing He Wuxiang was probably just to vent his anger. He didn't dare to face him at all. The two of them, one chasing and one fleeing, were extremely fast. They arrived at the location of the soul-devouring quicksand in an instant. Zhuan suddenly stepped into the range of the soul-devouring quicksand. Wei Wuyin frowned as he glanced at the constantly flowing soul-devouring quicksand with some apprehension. He could feel that this soul-devouring quicksand wasn't simple, but seeing Zhuowen safely enter the range of the soul-devouring quicksand, he didn't take it too seriously. Wei Wuyin stepped into the range of the soul-devouring quicksand. Then, a terrifying suction force suddenly crushed his body. Then, countless grains of quicksand gushed out from the soul-devouring quicksand, forming a huge hand of quicksand in midair. As soon as the hand of quicksand was formed, it grabbed Wei Wuyin and pulled him into the range of the soul-devouring quicksand. Wei Wuyin didn't even resist as his whole body sank into the depths of the quicksand. What's going on? Why are you acting as if nothing happened? Wei Wuyin was shocked and angry. He couldn't help but cry out in surprise when he saw Zhuowen strolling in the sky. Zhuan ignored Wei Wuyin's shock. He pointed his right hand at the void and used the Lone Peak Immortal technique. The huge and proud mountain fell from the sky and smashed heavily towards Wei Wuyin. Wei Wuyin's face was gloomy. He pointed his right hand and a surge of celestial core power gushed out and turned into a huge eagle. The eagle's cry resounded. Then, the giant eagle spread its wings and flew high, knocking the Lone Peak Immortal technique away. Wei Wuyin also found that as he used his celestial core power, the speed of the soul-devouring quicksand increased, and he was getting closer and closer to the vortex in the center of the quicksand. With Wei Wuyin's keen premonition, he could feel that if he was sucked into the vortex, he would be doomed eternally. Zhuowen didn't care at all about the Lone Peak being blasted away. Instead, he pointed his right hand once again, and surging celestial core power entered the Lone Peak, causing it to expand by tens of times, and rumbling as it pressed down towards the ground. Wei Wuyin's eyes were gloomy. He could only use his celestial core power to resist Zhuowen's harassment. Moreover, with Zhuowen's harassment, he was getting closer and closer to the vortex in the center of the quicksand. He also knew Zhuowen's ultimate goal. "Little bastard, I won't let you get what you want. I want you dead." Wei Wuyin's eyes were gloomy. He pointed his right hand at his glabella and immediately summoned the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman. The Beast Envoy Saint Talisman contained countless phantoms of terrifying fierce beasts from ancient times, including the Taoi. Sush, 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 sush. Countless phantoms of terrifying fierce beasts swept out and pounced on Juan as if they had gone mad. They set off a powerful and terrifying storm in the surroundings, enveloping Juan entirely. Seeing Wei Wuyin take out the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman, Juan sneered. He had been waiting for the moment Wei Wuyin used the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman. Juan pointed his right hand at his glabella and directly took out the primitive talisman. The moment the primitive talisman appeared, the countless phantoms of fierce beasts surrounding Juan all screamed in fear and scattered. The Beast Envoy Saint Talisman that was originally floating in front of Wei Wuyin trembled constantly. It faintly showed signs of breaking away from Wei Wuyin's control, breaking through the air and sweeping towards Juan. What's going on? Is this guy's talisman the talisman that contains origin energy that He Wushang mentioned? Damn it, this strange talisman is actually beginning to affect my Beast Envoy Saint Talisman. Wei Wuyin's gaze was gloomy. He waved his sleeve, intending to sweep the tottering Beast Envoy Saint Talisman into it. Unfortunately, the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman was already on the verge of going out of control. Just as Wei Wuyin was about to sweep it away, the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman buzzed as it tore through the air and shot towards Juan. Bastard! Wei Wuyin roared in anger. He was so angry that he spat out a mouthful of blood. Looking at the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman that was tearing through the air, Juan's gaze was blazing. However, just as the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman was about to reach Juan, the space around the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman suddenly shattered. In the shattered space, a hand suddenly stretched out and grabbed the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman. Then, with a violent tug, the Beast Envoy Saint Talisman was pulled into the space. Juan's face froze. His gaze was gloomy. He took a step forward and swept towards the space. Then, he threw out a punch, smashing into the space. Rumble! In an instant, the void exploded. Moreover, this kind of explosion was continuous. In an instant, the void within a radius of several hundred feet around the soul-devouring quicksand exploded into countless fragments. Juan took a few steps back. Then he gloomily stared at the surrounding space that was still exploding. He was extremely angry in his heart. From the moment of contact just now, he had already guessed who the owner of the hand was. Among the group of people who had entered this time, only Yang Yi was able to use the power of the void so skillfully. Yang, Juan shouted in a deep voice. The space 150 meters away from the soul-devouring quicksand crumbled inch by inch as a graceful figure slowly stepped out. This person was wearing a devil mask, revealing a pair of eyes that were sizing up Juan with ridicule. Two figures silently followed beside Yang Yi. One of them was the goddess of the prophet clan, Yen Tianwei. The other was a burly man with a body like an iron tower. Junior brother Juan, it seems that you have obtained a lot of benefits in here. Your speed of advancement is quite fast. Yang Yi said indifferently. Saying so, Yang Yi handed the Orc Envoy Holy Rune to Yen Tianwei behind him. After receiving the Orc Envoy Holy Rune, Yen Tianwei's calm eyes suddenly revealed a blazing color. Then, he directly pressed the Orc Envoy Holy Rune into his forehead. Looking at this scene, Juan's eyes suddenly became gloomy. The aura on Yen Tianwei's body was extremely familiar to Juan. This aura was the aura of source strength. Obviously, Yen Tianwei should have fused with many saint runes and refined them into origin talismans. This boy also has origin talismans. If I can snatch them, the benefits to me will be endless. Yen Tianwei stared at Juan in front of him with shining eyes. Yang Yi said indifferently, "Don't worry, I'll naturally do what I promised you." Saying so, Yang Yi glanced at the burly man beside him and said, "Capture this boy." The burly man grinned and said, "Don't worry, sir. Capturing this boy is no problem at all." Saying so, the burly man stomped his right foot and suddenly rushed into the range of the soul-devouring quicksand. The moment the burly man rushed into the soul-devouring quicksand, The endless quicksand suddenly surged up and set off a huge river of quicksand like a waterfall. It rushed violently towards the burly man with the intention of dragging him into the depths of the quicksand. The moment the quicksand rushed in front of the burly man, he grinned and suddenly punched out with his right fist. Then, the terrifying quicksand was directly dispersed by this punch, and the terrifying suction force that swept out from the depths of the soul-devouring quicksand was directly dispersed by this punch. However, the quicksand inside the soul-devouring quicksand was really too large. After the waterfall of quicksand was shattered by the burly man, an even more terrifying amount of quicksand suddenly rose up and condensed into an extremely huge hand of quicksand that grabbed the burly man. "What can mere quicksand do to me?" A disdainful voice came from the hand of quicksand. Then, the hand of quicksand directly collapsed into countless fine sand, and the burly man jumped out and rushed toward Jun. Zhuowen's pupils shrank and he couldn't help but retreat. The burly man gave him a very strong feeling. The suction force of the soul-devouring quicksand didn't have much effect on him at all. This burly man is definitely a true immortal. I must not fight with him. Zhuowen's mind was like countless muffled thunderbolts. Only experts above the true immortal realm could resist the suction force of the soul-devouring quicksand. Seeing that the burly man was destroying the obstruction of countless quicksand step by step and was constantly approaching him, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a decisive look. He stomped his right foot and immediately plunged into the vortex in the center of the soul-devouring quicksand. At the same time, he sealed all the auras related to the soul in his sea of consciousness as if they were dead objects. Zhuowen knew that the soul-devouring quicksand actually treated dead objects as nutrients and basically buried them in the deepest part of the ground. He could use the power of the soul-devouring quicksand to escape underground first. So fast? Zhuowen's face was gloomy. He immediately used his path will to support his perfect holy body. He stomped on the ground with his right foot, and the soil in front of him was unobstructed. Zhuowen rushed forward like a flying shuttle. After a while, Zhuowen stomped on the ground with his right foot and rushed toward the top of the soil. He remembered that this was the dangerous place. If this dangerous place couldn't trap the burly man, then Zhuowen really couldn't do anything. Zhuowen suddenly broke out of the ground. In front of him was an extremely wide rocky area. This rocky area was also one of the dangerous places in the underground maze. There were a total of 10 huge mountains in this rocky area. Rumble! Suddenly, the entire rocky area trembled violently. Zhuowen's face changed slightly. He knew that the burly man was chasing after him. He rushed toward the 10 mountains in front of him without hesitation. Not long after Zhuowen escaped, a strong figure rushed out of the soil not far from Zhuowen. It was the burly man. At that moment, the burly man's body was surrounded by a strange black gas, which made his figure look hazy. "You can't escape, little guy." The burly man grinned, but his smile was extremely cold. He stomped on the ground with his right foot, and the entire ground shook. He then chased after Zhuowen. Zhuowen naturally noticed the burly man rushing toward him. His eyes flashed with a cold light. He then jumped into the range of the 10 mountains. Then he continuously used a mysterious footwork technique inside the 10 mountains. It was as if he was following a certain pattern. He quickly entered the other side of the 10 mountains. At the same time, the burly man had also stepped into the range of the 10 mountains. However, the moment he stepped into the 10 mountains, the entire rocky area trembled again. Crick, crick. Suddenly, the surrounding 10 mountains began to squirm. Countless rocks slid down from the top of the mountains. Then, the 10 mountains all turned into 10 huge stone giants. Each stone giant was thousands of feet tall. In particular, the murderous aura of the stone giants was extremely strong. Even a genuine immortal would be afraid of such a terrifying murderous aura. The moment the murderous aura spread throughout the rocky area, the burly man stopped and stared at the 10 stone giants around him. Did he know in advance that there was a trap here and led me here? But it should be his first time here. How did he know there was a trap here, and how could he avoid such a powerful trap so easily? The burly man stared at the figure in the distance with a puzzled look in his eyes. From the various signs just now, it could be seen that Juan was extremely familiar with the underground maze. It was as if he had entered this underground maze before. Rumble. However, before the burly man could think about it, the surrounding 10 stone giants had already punched him. If I want to contend with Yang Yi, I can only find Senior Shiji, the first mountain god, and the Lord of the Divine Tomb. Juan murmured in a low voice. He decided to find Shiji and the Lord of the Divine Tomb first, and then go to the underground maze exit together. Although his cultivation base had advanced to the late stage of the Sky Immortal realm, it was still difficult for him to face a true immortal, especially Yang Yi and the burly man. These two were definitely not early-stage true immortals. They should be stronger existences. Although the burly man's body was a heavenly insect, when he was chasing Juan, he did not reveal any heavenly insect aura. It was only after Juan left that the heavenly insect showed its full strength. Taking out the jade pendant Shiji had given him, Juan used the jade pendant as a guide, chose a direction, and rushed away. About an hour later, Juan found Shiji in a corner with a vigilant look. When he saw Juan, Shiji's face was naturally full of excitement. After finding Shiji, the first mountain god followed the aura of the Azure Dragon Palace and found Juan. Of course, when Shiji and the first mountain god sensed that Juan's cultivation base had reached the late stage of the Sky Immortal realm, they were both surprised. Of course, Juan only gave a brief explanation and did not give any details. Although the two of them were puzzled, they did not harp on this topic. After all, this was Juan's own secret. Moreover, Juan also told them about his encounter with Sangjia, which made Shiji very excited. As for the first mountain god, Juan also found a trace of excitement in his eyes. Of course, the excitement in the first mountain god's eyes only flashed for a moment. If Juan did not pay attention, he would not have noticed it. It seems that the first mountain god is also related to Sangjia? Juan looked deeply at the first mountain god, and his eyes showed that he was thinking. Chapter 1852. Exotic Beast. Hearing that, Juan nodded. This underground maze was huge. If they were to continue searching, it would take a lot of time. Let's go. Follow me. Juan nodded. Soon after, he led the first mountain god and Shiji in a certain direction. Following the topographic map given by Sangjia, he kept moving towards the exit indicated on the map. If one were to look down from above, they would be able to see that the underground maze was in the shape of a ring. Furthermore, each ring was connected to the next. It looked extremely complicated, and Juan's group was heading towards the center of these countless rings. Furthermore, each ring of the underground maze had its own corresponding danger zone. The entrance to the next ring was also extremely hidden. It was extremely difficult to enter the deepest ring of the underground maze. If one didn't know the topography of this underground maze beforehand, it would be impossible to enter the deepest inner ring of the underground maze based on one's own guesses. Juan and his group moved very quickly. They smoothly broke through one ring after another and finally entered the deepest inner ring of the underground maze. The inner ring wasn't very big. It was only about a few hundred feet. It was surrounded by ring-shaped rock walls. The ground was paved with white marble. In the center of the inner ring stood a rather large altar made of white jade. At this moment, a white flame was burning on top of the altar. Is this the exit? Gazing at the altar in front of him, Shiji's gaze was solemn. He looked at Juan in front of him with a puzzled expression. Even the first mountain god had the same expression. Juan didn't answer. Instead, he silently walked towards the altar. Sangjia's last words echoed in his mind. Little guy, the way to break out of this underground maze is in the deepest part of the underground maze. In the deepest part of the underground maze, there is an altar. This altar is burning with a white flame. This flame is the energy center of the underground maze. I will teach you a method. This method can help you absorb the energy of this white flame. When the white flame's energy is completely absorbed by you, this white flame will extinguish. At that time, the underground maze will completely collapse and you will leave this underground maze. Zhuan silently stood in front of the altar. After pondering for a moment, he said to Shiji and the first mountain god behind him, "Both of you, please protect me. This white flame is the key to breaking out of this underground maze. I can't be disturbed during this time." The first mountain god and Shiji looked at each other and nodded. Then, Zhuan immediately sat cross-legged in front of the altar. According to Zhangjia's method, he started forming hand seals with his hands. Zhuan's hand seals. Zhuan. And his hands. Zhuan. And Black's Shueying. Shui Studio. The whirlpool. Was white the whirlpool? The whirlpool, white was studio. However, the white flame was even stranger. It had been absorbed by the black whirlpool for a long time, but the flame did not show any signs of extinguishing or weakening. It was as if it would never die out. Moreover, to Zhuo Wen's surprise, as he continued to absorb the white flames, the strange flames were transformed into rich celestial origin energy after passing through the black vortex. The celestial origin energy surged into Zhuo Wen's body through his meridians and into his dantian. After experiencing this benefit, Zhuan worked even harder to absorb the white flame on the altar. Time slowly passed. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. During these 3 months, the first mountain god and Shiji had been waiting for Zhuo Wen at this place. The two of them were increasingly curious about the white flame on the altar. Zhuan had absorbed the white flame for 3 months, but it still showed no signs of extinguishing. In the past 3 months, the situation in the underground maze had changed quite a bit. Relying on Yan Tianwei's prediction ability, Yang Yi and the other two found Dong Fangxin, the ancestor of the Heavy Shield clan, and Ji Wubing, the ancestor of the Immortal clan. Dong Fangxin and Ji Wubing were no match for Yang Yi and the others. In the end, under Yang Yi's coercion, they reluctantly handed over their holy talismans. In the inner ring, the first mountain god and Shiji, who were bored to death, were suddenly startled. They found that the white flame on the altar in the center of the inner ring began to flicker violently, as if it was constantly swaying in the wind and would be extinguished at any time. The flame is going to be extinguished. Shiji's eyes lit up. The first mountain god nodded slightly and stared at the white flame on the altar in front of him. Suddenly, a breeze swept out from Zhuowen's body and brushed past the white flame. The white flame continued to flicker, slowly shrinking, and finally extinguishing. The moment the white flame was extinguished, the entire underground maze shook violently. It was as if something had appeared in the depths of the underground maze. Rumble! Countless ring-shaped rock walls of the underground maze began to collapse and disintegrate, turning into countless rubble and ruins. All the cultivators in the underground maze noticed the abnormality of the underground maze. Their eyes were filled with curiosity, not knowing what was going on in the underground maze. When all the rock walls had shattered, everyone realized that outside the underground labyrinth, there was actually a cloud of black fog that could not be seen clearly. Following that, the underground maze world began to spin, and it spun faster and faster. Everyone felt dizzy in the midst of the spinning. When the spinning sensation finally stopped, everyone realized that they were no longer in the black fog world where the underground maze was, but in a huge cave world. This cavern was extremely spacious. Below the cavern was an endless sea of magma. Above the sea of magma, there were 5 stone pillars that seemed to pierce through the heavens and the earth. At the top of each stone pillar was a round stone platform. Each platform was extremely large, at least several thousand feet wide. At this moment, everyone appeared on one of the huge platforms on top of the stone pillars. Suddenly, Zhuowen raised his head and saw a scene that he would never forget in his life. At the top of the 5 stone pillars, there was a huge void space. This void space was very similar to the starry sky outside the heavenly armor continent, but there were some differences. Although there were many stars in the void, they were all dim and lightless, as if they had reached the end of their road. In front of this void space, there was a huge head that was comparable to this void space. The head looked like a dragon, but it was not a dragon. There were 12 huge golden horns on its head, and it looked extremely ferocious. If one looked closely, the head was connected to the void space, and if one looked closely, they would find that the void space's shape was very similar to a huge beast's body. Could it be that this starry void space is the huge beast's body? Zhuan had an extremely bold guess, but this guess was extremely ridiculous to him. However, the scene in front of him made him think so. It wasn't just Zhuan. The others more or less had the same guess as Zhuan. At this moment, the huge beast's right eye slowly closed. The moment the beast's right eye closed, Zhuan could clearly see that the beast's right pupil was very different from an ordinary eyeball. It wasn't a black eyeball, but a ring-shaped one. Furthermore, it wasn't just a single ring, but a combination of countless rings. Seeing the ring-shaped pupil, Zhuan couldn't help but associate it with the underground maze. Wasn't that the layout of the underground maze? It was also made up of ring-shaped rock walls. Could it be that the so-called underground labyrinth is this exotic beast's right eye pupil? Was the place we were at just now just within the right eye of the exotic beast? The more Zhuan thought about it, the more shocked he became. He stared at the beast in the sky, wanting to know where it came from. This beast has been trapped here for who knows how many years, right? It looks like it has fallen? Shiji looked up at the strange beast and murmured in a low voice. At this moment, the Lord of the Divine Tomb also came to Zhuowen's side. As for the Divine Lord Dohua, he came side by side with Elder Gu. Behind them were the four lords of the battlefield. Yang Yi, the burly man, and Yen Tianwei stood not far away from the Divine Lord Dohua and the others. In addition, Ji Wubing, Dong Fangxin, Wei Wuyin, Kong Lianxuan, and the First Corpse King gathered together. The five of them were considered the weakest of the three parties. If they didn't unite, they really wouldn't have any competition in the depths of the underground. However, Ji Wubing and Dong Fangxin looked at Yang Yi and the others with extremely gloomy eyes. Their holy talismans had been forcibly taken away by Yang Yi. Meanwhile, Wei Wuyin, Kong Lianxuan, and the First Corpse King looked at Zhuowen with gazes that contained ill intent, but they didn't dare to act rashly. However, Zhuowen had already become a force to be reckoned with. Merely the few great true immortal powerhouses by Zhuowen's side were enough to make them suffer. Don't you think the aura of this beast is very familiar? We met it at the bottom of the black pool. The first mountain god narrowed his eyes and suddenly transmitted his voice to Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed as he carefully observed the huge exotic beast in the sky. He had indeed sensed a familiar aura. His gaze landed on the exotic beast's claws, and a look of understanding appeared in his eyes. It was this beast that had attacked them at the bottom of the black pool. Thinking that even the first mountain god couldn't withstand the might of this beast's claw, Zhuowen became even more vigilant. The reason why the heavenly armor planet is full of vitality in the extraterritorial starry sky is probably related to this beast. The heavenly god Gonggu who invaded the heavenly armor planet wanted to extract the star core of the heavenly armor planet, but he was injured by a mysterious force. It's probably also because of this beast. The Lord of the Divine Mausoleum slowly walked to Zhuowen's side and stared at the terrifying beast with a complicated expression. Everyone was shocked. What the Lord of the Divine Mausoleum said was too shocking. This beast was so terrifying that it could injure a heavenly god. Just how powerful was this beast? Do Hua silently looked at the beast above. He wasn't too surprised by the Lord of the Divine Mausoleum's words because his goal this time was this beast. Chapter 1853. Left Eye, what exactly is this exotic beast? Shiji asked, a little puzzled. The master of the Divine Mausoleum shook his head and said, I don't know. I only know that this beast is very powerful and terrifying. Since this beast is so powerful, aren't we in great danger now? Zhuowen frowned and looked very wary. After all, this beast could seriously injure a divine realm expert. This beast is indeed powerful. With its strength, it can kill all of us here. But now, for some reason, this beast is seriously injured and on the verge of death. It has fallen into a deep sleep. If there is no great stimulation, it won't wake up. Suddenly, Do Hua, the divine lord who had been silent, spoke. He looked at the beast above him that was quietly closing its eyes. His eyes were full of passion. You are all sensible people. I can tell you clearly that there are many planets in this beast's body. I guess that these planets were swallowed by this beast. Moreover, this beast's body is like the void. After swallowing the planets, it is like a small starry sky. However, this small starry sky is far inferior to the real starry sky. Its resistance is also much smaller. Divine immortals and above can travel freely in this beast's body. Think about it, even if you haven't reached the divine transformation realm, you can still travel to other planets. Moreover, these planets may have great opportunities. Moreover, if you find a suitable planet that contains a star core, when you become a demigod in the future, you can become a divine realm expert with the star core. At this point, Do Hua, the divine lord, smiled and looked at the people around him silently. Everyone present was a top figure in the central region. Although they hadn't reached the divine transformation realm, after experiencing the catastrophe 10,000 years ago, they all knew that the key to becoming a divine transformation realm expert was the star core. Without the star core, celestial core power couldn't be completely transformed into star god power. This way, they couldn't become a real divine realm expert and would only be a demigod. Back then, Songjia was already a divine realm expert, but he didn't know how to become one. If he had known about it, he would have become a true heavenly god long ago. The heavenly armor planet, on the other hand, was extremely special. The heavenly armor planet should have been formed because of this strange beast. This strange beast had many planets in its body. Back then, the surging immortal energy that surged from the depths of the earth to the heavenly armor continent should also have come from this strange beast. As soon as Do Hua finished speaking, many people's eyes lit up. In their opinion, if they could really find a star core here, it would undoubtedly be extremely beneficial to them. At the very least, it would not be too much of a problem for them to reach the divine transformation stage in the future. Yang Yi glanced at Do Hua indifferently. The corner of his mouth curved into a mocking arc, but he didn't say anything. Do Hua flicked his finger and took out a jade artifact from his spirit ring. This jade artifact was 1/2 meter tall and was made of tremolite nephrite. It was yellowish-green with brown spots and gray spots. At the bottom of the artifact was the shape of a human wearing a crown. The hand was holding a beast. On the beast and the crown, there was a bird standing on one side. As soon as this jade appeared, it exuded a sense of vicissitudes. This jade should be from a very long time ago. It contained the aura of time. After taking out this jade, Do Hua's eyes were extremely solemn. He said in a deep voice, "This jade is called the Jade God Human Bird and Beast Celestial Artifact. It is the most precious treasure left in the chaotic divine temple in ancient times. With this celestial artifact, we can forcibly break open the void body of the beast and make it easy for us to walk in the small starry sky. Everyone, if you want to enter the beast's body, then help me open the passage. What is inside depends on your luck." Then, Do Hua's right hand formed a seal. Celestial core power gushed out and fell on the jade. With the support of the celestial core power, this jade artifact suddenly flew into the air. Its surface burst out with a soft jade-colored radiance, and the carvings of a human, a bird, and a beast seemed to have come to life, vivid and lifelike. Behind Do Hua, Elder Gu and the 4 lords of the battlefield did not hesitate to transfer their celestial core power into the jade. Yang Yi narrowed his eyes and nodded to Yen Tianwei and the big man. The 3 of them also transferred their celestial core power into the jade. On the other side, the first corpse king, Dong Fangxin, Kong Lianshuan, Wei Wuin, and Ji Wubing looked at each other. Without any hesitation, they imitated Do Hua and the others. Could this Do Hua be deceiving us? Shi Ji frowned slightly. The Lord of the Divine Tomb said indifferently, "This Jade God Human Bird and Beast Celestial Artifact is indeed left behind from ancient times. Do Hua did not lie to us about this. It's just that whether it was left behind by Lord Songjia remains to be seen." With the approval of the Lord of the Divine Tomb, Shi Ji Zhuan, and the others also transferred their celestial core power into the jade in the air. Moreover, Zhuan found that the moment his celestial core power entered the jade, a rather complicated voice sounded in his mind. These voices were like echoes in an empty valley, constantly reverberating, as if many people were chanting sacrificial texts at the same time. As these voices continued to reverberate in his mind, Zhuowen's body felt light, as if he was about to rise into the sky. Dou Hua's hands formed a series of seals, and his eyes became particularly dignified. Finally, with a low shout, the jade-colored light on the surface of the jade in the air burst out to the extreme. In the end, a figure with strange patterns all over his body appeared in the void. He was riding on a savage beast, and there was a lively bird in his right hand. The figure gently tossed his right hand, and the nimble bird made a crisp chirping sound, then cut through the void and finally landed on the body of the strange beast in the air. The bird gently flew over the exotic beast's body as if some kind of law appeared where the bird passed. Then, a crack appeared on the exotic beast's body. It was a wound that looked like it had been slashed by a sharp saber. This scar was dozens of feet long, but compared to the huge body of the strange beast, it was insignificant. And the moment this scar was formed, the strange beast's body slowly squirmed and began to repair the huge scar. "Let's go. Let's go in." Dou Hua's eyes flashed, and then he took a step forward and took the lead to enter the crack. Elder Gu and the 4 lords of the battlefield followed closely behind, and Yang Yi and the other 2 silently followed behind. "Let's go in too." Ji Wubing, the first corpse king, and the other 4 revealed a look of excitement, and impatiently turned into 5 long rainbows and drilled into the crack. Although the resistance inside the strange beast's body is much smaller than in the starry sky, we still have to be careful. "Let's go." The Lord of the Divine Tomb instructed everyone and took the lead to fly up, followed by the 4 perfected immortal Dao soldiers. "Zhuan, you must be careful," Shiji said. Then, he glanced at the first mountain god beside Zhuan, nodded, and also left. "Zhuan, aren't you going in?" The first mountain god suddenly turned his head and asked. Zhuan stared at the strange beast's wound that was gradually recovering, and said in a deep voice, "Do you have a way to slow down the recovery of this strange beast's wound?" The first mountain god took a deep look at Zhuan, then nodded and said, "Yes, but I need to borrow the time law of the Azure Dragon Hall." Hearing this, Zhuan rolled up his sleeve, took out the Azure Dragon Hall, and handed it to the first mountain god. The first mountain god took the Azure Dragon Hall and rushed to the wound on the strange beast's body. Then he pulled out an extremely powerful time law from the Azure Dragon Hall with his right hand and used it to slow down the recovery of the wound. However, Zhuowen's gaze was not on the first mountain god, but on the strange beast's left eye that had not yet closed. Previously, Sangjie had given him a topographic map of this place and helped him get out of the underground maze. At that time, although Sangjie's words were vague, he finally mentioned that he was in a place opposite the underground maze. The underground maze was in the strange beast's right eye, and the place opposite the right eye was the strange beast's left eye. "Should I enter the left eye to take a look?" Zhuan frowned slightly and stared at the strange beast's left eye. Coincidentally, Zhuan noticed that the strange beast's left eye seemed to have moved, and its circular pupil fell on Zhuan, causing his body to tremble. It was as if countless muffled thunder had exploded in his mind. Dang dang dang. Zhuan took a few steps back and looked again. However, he found that the left eye was still lifeless, and there were no signs of it moving. "Is it my imagination?" Zhuan muttered in a low voice. At this moment, the first mountain god brought the Azure Dragon Hall to Zhuowen's side and said, "I used the time law of the Azure Dragon Hall to slow down the recovery of the wound by dozens of times. Originally, it would only take a few hours for the wound to completely recover. Now, it might take more than 10 days. "Thank you." Zhuowen nodded. "Why are you not entering the strange beast's body now?" the first mountain god asked in a low voice. Zhuowen's gaze fell on the strange beast's left eye again, and he said in a low voice, "I am looking for the strongest expert 10,000 years ago, Sangjie." The first mountain god's pupils shrank, and then he said in a low voice, "You know where Sangjie is?" Zhuan did not answer, but his right foot stomped, and he flew towards the strange beast's left eye. The first mountain god looked at Zhuowen's movements silently, especially when he saw Zhuowen fly towards the strange beast's left eye. Flying in front of the left eye, Zhuan quietly looked at the left eye that was bigger than his body. Then he took out a white crystal from his spirit ring. This white crystal was given to him by Cangjie's shadow. After taking out the white crystal, Zhuan gently pressed it into the strange beast's left eye. Suddenly, the white crystal entered the strange beast's left eye without any hindrance, and the circular pupil in the left eye began to spin. A suction force suddenly appeared, and it was like a giant hand that grabbed Zhuan and pulled him into the depths of the left eye. The first mountain god's pupils shrank when he saw this scene, and he also flew into the range of the left eye. Then he followed the suction force and entered the inner world of the left eye. Chapter 1854. Cangjie in front of Zhuan, the white crystal emitted a white light, like a guiding light in the dark. Through the white light, Zhuan's attention fell on the surroundings of the main hall. He discovered that the walls around the main hall were entwined with countless black veins. They were like vines that crawled all over the walls. Looking at the countless black veins around him, Zhuan's eyes were filled with fear. He was not unfamiliar with these black veins. When Cangjie first appeared in front of him, the surface of the hall he was in was also surrounded by these strange black veins. It seemed that this was the place where Cangjie was trapped. Zhuan was worried that he could not find Cangjie in these 10 days. Even if he found Cangjie, he was not sure whether he could save Cangjie. After all, when he saw Cangjie was not in good condition. I don't know where Cangjie is trapped in this hall. Zhuan looked around and found that there were many doors around the hall. These doors were simple in shape and looked exactly the same. It was difficult to tell which one was the real one. Suddenly, the white crystal emitting white light in front of Zhuan turned into a white shadow and rushed toward the door in front of it. It was so fast that it almost turned into a shadow. Zhuan raised his eyebrows. The white crystal belonged to Cangjie. Since it chose the door in front of him, there must be a reason. Thinking of this, Zhuan kicked with his right foot and followed the white crystal. However, when Zhuan arrived at the door in front of him, countless black veins rushed toward Zhuan like creepers, as if they were trying to stop Zhuan from entering the hall. Bang, bang, bang. When these black veins rushed toward him, the white crystal in front of him suddenly burst out a blazing white light. The white light was like countless sharp blades, flying in all directions. The converging black veins were sliced into pieces wherever the white light blades passed. Black blood splattered everywhere, dyeing the entire ground black. After the black veins were all destroyed, the white crystal was like a hot knife through butter. It instantly blasted open the door and entered the palace. Zhuan followed closely behind. Then, the white crystal blasted open palace doors one after another, passing through many halls. It was as if there were countless halls in this space. As he went deeper, Zhuan realized that the black veins around him were getting stronger and bigger. The white blade emitted by the white crystal was obviously having a hard time cutting through the black veins. After breaking through the 99th palace door, the black veins in front of the 100th palace door were so thick that they were dozens of feet long. Each black vein was extremely terrifying, and their power was much more terrifying than all the previous black veins combined. Zhuan's expression changed when he saw the black veins in front of the 100th Dao Palace. He felt that the black veins were too dangerous. They were almost as dangerous as the dense black veins in the palace where Cangjie had been. The white crystal buzzed incessantly, seeming to be extremely excited. It seems that Cangjie is behind the 100th palace door? Zhuan's eyes flickered as he muttered to himself. Suddenly, the black veins that covered the surface of the palace door rushed out. The black veins that were dozens of feet wide were like ferocious black pythons. They stretched out toward Zhuan, wanting to swallow him whole. Bang, bang, bang. At this moment, the white crystal emitted an even more terrifying white light. Then the white light materialized into sharp white blades that shot out in all directions. Countless white blades slammed into the black veins, cutting out black blood. However, the black veins were too thick. The white blades could not cut through all the black veins. The black veins that were covered in black blood broke through the white blade's attack and rushed toward Zhuan. Zhuowen's pupils shrank. An extremely strong sense of danger came from his mind. Then, he stomped his right foot and his dao will spread out as he retreated rapidly. Unfortunately, when he retreated to the end of the palace door, he found that there was no way out. He had walked into a dead end. I can only fight head-on. Zhuan gritted his teeth and flicked his finger. He immediately took out the mysterious scabbard that he had obtained from Zhan Bai's head and threw it forward. The mysterious scabbard was extremely fast. It instantly smashed into the black veins at the front. Then an extremely vast and terrifying force crushed the black veins into black powder. Moreover, when the black veins at the front were crushed into powder, the black veins that surged from the back exploded into black blood like a domino effect. Looking at the power of the mysterious scabbard, Yuan was a little shocked. Although he had used the mysterious scabbard to deal with He Wushang, he knew that the mysterious scabbard was very strong. However, at that time, Yuan had only thrown it out casually and did not unleash too much of the mysterious scabbard's power. Now that Zhuowen had the mysterious scabbard for a period of time, he had a general understanding of it. This time, when he used it again, he did not expect the mysterious scabbard to unleash such terrifying power. However, there were quite a number of black veins in front of the hall door. After the mysterious scabbard shattered the remaining black veins, it caused the other black veins to notice Zhuowen. Immediately, an even greater number of black veins suddenly rushed out and rushed toward Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes were solemn. He took the mysterious scabbard with his right hand and threw it out. The mysterious scabbard kept spinning and drew an arc in the air. Bang, bang, bang. The black veins in front of him exploded the moment they came into contact with the mysterious scabbard. Black blood splattered all over the palace, causing a terrifying black rain to fall. Zhuowen followed behind the mysterious scabbard, taking one step at a time toward the palace door. The white crystal also followed closely behind the mysterious scabbard. Countless white blades were formed, destroying the black veins that were coming at them. Boom! Finally, the mysterious scabbard faced the black rain and smashed heavily in front of the palace door. Then, a terrifying explosion sounded. The entire palace door in front of him exploded and instantly collapsed into dust. Through the dust, Yuan saw the scene inside the 100th palace door. It was still a palace, but it was much more ancient than the previous 99 palaces. Inside, one could clearly feel the ruthlessness of time. In the center of the palace, there were candles floating. However, the candles were extremely dim, as if they would be extinguished at any time. With the help of the candles, Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and looked at the throne in the deepest part of the palace. A figure sat quietly on the throne. The moment the palace door shattered, the figure on the throne slowly raised his head. His eyes fell on Zhuowen as he said faintly, "You have come." Don't. The moment Zhuowen stepped through the palace door, he suddenly heard a sound that sounded like a heartbeat. It constantly beat against his eardrums, causing his heart to beat faster involuntarily. It was as if his heart was about to jump out of his body. After entering the hall, he discovered that in addition to the countless black veins around the hall, there were also many bulges. These bulges were like hearts, constantly beating. Moreover, in the process of beating, streams of black blood flowed out. Zhuowen stared at the bulges as an ominous feeling rose in his heart. The aura of these bulges gave him a familiar feeling, but he could not be sure. "Xiao He, is he your master?" Zhuowen was secretly on guard against his surroundings. However, he did not walk into the depths of the palace without permission. Instead, he sent a message to Xiao He. Swoosh! Xiao He flew out from between Zhuowen's eyebrows. Its gaze fell on the figure on the throne in the depths of the palace. Its breathing was rapid as it said with an excited expression, "Yes, it is my master's aura. However, other than my master's aura, there is another extremely unfamiliar aura on this person." Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly. He stared fixedly at the figure on the throne, but did not act rashly. "Little fellow, your temperament is not bad. Under such circumstances, you are still able to remain calm and distinguish between truth and falsehood. That is commendable. It is not without reason that Tai Yu chose you. The figure on the throne struggled for a while, but found that it was impossible to stand up. It could only give up and look indifferently at Zhuan and Xiao He in front of it. Master, is it you? Xiao He trembled all over and asked in a hoarse voice. The figure on the throne trembled all over, but sighed softly and said, "It is me, and it is not me." With that, the figure looked at Zhuan and said, "Little fellow, come forward. As long as I am awake, the things in this palace will not do anything to you." Hearing this, Zhuan frowned slightly. After thinking for a moment, he finally decided to go forward and take a look. What the figure said should be true. It should be true that it was Cangjie. When Zhuan came to the depths of the palace and walked to the front of the throne, his gaze fell on the figure on the throne. Then, his eyes narrowed involuntarily and he gasped. The man sitting on the throne had a withered face, like a mummy. His forehead bone was protruding high, and his eyes were somewhat lifeless. From the outline of the withered man's face, Zhuan could still see a trace of Cangjie's appearance. However, the change was too great. If one did not look carefully, one would not be able to recognize it at all. What shocked Zhuan even more was that Cangjie's body was rooted by countless black veins. These veins were almost integrated with the meridians in Cangjie's body and could not be distinguished from each other. Zhuan could see that in the process of the black veins constantly squirming, Cangjie's face would show an extremely painful expression, as if his tendons and bones were being pulled out. Chapter 1855. Devour the aura of the exotic beast mark on Cangjie's glabella was much more formidable than that of Kong Wen and the black and white giants. When Zhuan looked at the black exotic beast mark, he couldn't help but hear an earth-shaking roar in his head. It was as if an ancient beast was constantly roaring in his head. Zhuan took a few steps back and hurriedly moved his eyes away from the black exotic beast mark. He was shaken inwardly. "Master? It's really you, Master. How did you end up like this?" Xiao He's eyes bulged as she asked sorrowfully. Cangjie looked at Xiao He silently and said bitterly, "It's a long story." Then, Cangjie looked at Zhuan and said, "Kid, since you have the Fushi cauldron, you're the only one who can save me this time." Zhuan's eyes shrank as he asked in a low voice, "What do you mean? Also, can you tell me what happened to you?" Cangjie took a deep look at Zhuan and said with a sigh, "Let me tell you. You will know about it sooner or later. Since you can enter the left eye, it means that you've broken through the right eye. You've seen the giant beast in the cave, haven't you?" Zhuan and Xiao He nodded. That exotic beast with a universe inside was really strange. Cangjie seemed to know it. "Actually, I don't know the origin of this beast. But I know that it's called Devour. It's an extremely powerful and rare exotic beast in the starry sky. Its origin has always been mysterious. If this beast is placed outside the starry sky, many almighty experts will crazily fight for it. As you can see, there are many planets in this beast's body. These planets were all devoured by this beast. The structure of this beast's body is similar to the structure of the starry sky. It can accommodate a large number of planets. As this beast continues to grow, its body capacity will also slowly increase. The number of planets it can devour will also become extremely terrifying. The more planets it swallows, the stronger it becomes, and the faster it grows. Our heavenly armor star was formed because of Devour. Our heavenly armor star is located in outer space. The outer space can't produce any living planets. If it weren't for the many planets in Devour's body, the heavenly armor continent wouldn't have such abundant immortal chi, and the heavenly armor star wouldn't have had living creatures. Zhuan's face changed. He had never thought that the terrifying exotic beast would be called Devour. Moreover, this exotic beast could swallow planets. It should be known that the heavenly armor star and the heavenly armor continent were a whole entity. Even the strongest warriors of the heavenly armor star couldn't escape the restraint of the heavenly armor continent. However, Devour could swallow planets as big as the heavenly armor star. Moreover, he could swallow more than one planet. It was no wonder that Devour could injure heavenly god Ganj with just one move. It seemed that Devour was really powerful. Zhuan quietly looked at Songjie and didn't answer. He knew that Songjie would continue to talk. After all, Songjie had just introduced Devour's features. He hadn't told him what had happened to him in the past. Then, Songjie told him what had happened in the past. The process was similar to the image in the black sphere that the master of the divine tomb had given him. Zhuan already knew what had happened before Songjie had sealed the passage between the heavenly armor star and the heavenly armor continent. After Songjie had sealed the passage between the heavenly armor star and the heavenly armor continent, Songjie was severely injured and fell deep into the ground created by heavenly god Ganj. When Songjie fell into the deepest part of the ground, he was entangled by some black veins, which then led him into Devour's left eye. Moreover, these black veins burst out from the depths of the ground, rolling up countless corpses of the saints on the ancient battlefield into Devour's body. At that time, I was an arrow at the end of its flight. I thought I would die for sure. However, when I was dragged into Devour's left eye, the countless black veins had given me endless vitality, forcefully reviving me. As you can see, those black veins have fused with me. Speaking of this, Songjie's eyes were full of vicissitudes. What are these black veins after all? Asked Zhuan in a low voice. Parasites. They're parasites in Devour's body. I don't know why, but Devour's life aura is getting weaker and weaker. The parasites lurking in Devour's body have become rampant, and they have drilled out of Devour's body. Then, Songjie's lifeless eyes fell on Zhuan. Previously, in Devour's left eye, I guess you have also encountered some experts who had participated in the ancient war, right? Zhuan nodded slightly. He thought of Book Immortal Kong 1, the black-armored man in the Black Desert, and the black and white giant outside the chess world. They all had the mark of the exotic beast between their eyebrows. He even thought of the exotic beast inside demigod Zhan Bai's head. He knew that the exotic beast was the parasite, but he didn't expect that Devour's parasite would be afraid of the mysterious eyeball. So, what was the mysterious eyeball? Moreover, he vaguely guessed that the different colors of the parasite mark between the eyebrows represented the level of the parasite. The blue mark between Kong Wen's eyebrows should be of a lower level, while the purple mark should be of a higher level. The black mark between Songjie's eyebrows should be of the highest level, and the parasite it represented should be the most formidable. What can I do to help you? Zhuan's eyes twinkled as he sighed. Songjie's eyes twinkled as he said bitterly, there's only one way to save me. You have to find Devour's larva in Devour's body. Only Devour's aura can expel Devour's parasites. Devour has a larva? Zhuan's pupils shrank as he was surprised. Songjie nodded and said, I've been trapped in Devour's left eye for 10,000 years. Although my cultivation base hasn't improved, my soul consciousness has been strengthened under my cultivation. I'm afraid it's comparable to the real God realm now. I've used my soul consciousness to observe Devour's body for 10,000 years, and I've found that Devour has a larva. Moreover, I suspect that Devour's life is draining continuously. I'm afraid it has something to do with the larva in its body. At this moment, the adult Devour has reached the end of its road. It can't control the parasites in its body. The parasite in my body is the strongest among all the parasites. It's the king of all parasites. It's impossible for me to expel the parasites with my own power. Speaking of this, Songjie's eyes looked sorrowful. Moreover, I don't have much time left. When all the candles in the hall are extinguished, the parasites in my body will control me completely. At that time, even Devour's larva won't be able to save me. Xiao He looked at Zhuan and said, Please save my master. I beg you. Zhuan's eyes twinkled. He recalled the desire in Do Hua's eyes when Devour's body was opened. He was sure that Do Hua wasn't so eager to enter Devour's body to save Songjie, but for Devour's larva. If he could get his hands on a powerful creature like Devour and tame it as his mount, he would have no problem traversing the starry sky. Even if his cultivation base hadn't reached the divine transformation realm, he could rely on Devour to injure or even kill heavenly god realm experts. Not only Do Hua, but Yang Yi might also have the same idea. However, Zhuan couldn't figure out why the Lord of the Divine Tomb and Shiji had also entered Devour. He glanced at Songjie. Although he had told Shiji about Songjie, Songjie hadn't asked him to reveal his location. However, Songjie's arrangement was somewhat thought-provoking. It's not that I don't want to help. It's just that it's too difficult. Whether it's Do Hua, the four lords of the battlefield, or the Lord of the Divine Tomb, they are all true immortal experts. Although my cultivation base has been greatly improved, I'm still not qualified to compete with them, Juon said awkwardly. Don't worry. The Lord of the Divine Mausoleum and Shiji will help you. Don't worry about that. Additionally, I will also attach my power to you, giving you the strength to fight against a true immortal, Songjie said. Jun was silent for a moment. Finally, he nodded and said, Okay, I can help you. However, I can't guarantee that I can get Devour's larva. Also, why did you choose me? Because the Fushi Cauldron chose you. Only the Fushi Cauldron can bear my power. Although your body is quite strong, the power of a demigod is enough to make your body explode and die, Songjie said indifferently. Hearing this, Yun was silent for a moment. Then, he took out the Fushi Cauldron from between his eyebrows. Staring at the Fushi Cauldron, Songjie's eyes revealed a touch of nostalgia. Then, he gently waved his right hand and took the Fushi Cauldron in his hand. He sighed and said, After so many years, I didn't expect to see the Fushi Cauldron again. How nostalgic. After sighing with emotion, Songjie's withered right hand pinched his thumb and middle finger and gently touched the surface of the Fushi Cauldron. Immediately, a powerful energy, which made Zhuowen's face change, was transferred into the Fushi Cauldron from Songjie's right hand. The Fushi Cauldron, which was rusty and broken, began to glow with vitality. The broken surface gradually faded away, and it looked much more dignified and new. About 2 hours later, Songjie's eyes revealed a tired look. The many candles in the center of the hall were dimmer than when Zhuowen entered the hall. Zhuowen knew that these candles represented the light of Songjie's life. If these candles were all extinguished, Songjie's life would come to an end. Chapter 1856. Blood splashing 5 steps. Zhuowen carefully took the Fushi Cauldron from Songjie with a solemn expression. The Fushi Cauldron had undergone a drastic change from before. Its appearance and aura had become much stronger. Songjie's power, in particular, was a peak demigod's power. The moment the Fushi Cauldron landed in Zhuowen's hand, a yellow-furred fox leaped out from the cauldron on a divine turtle. The yellow-furred fox stared at Songjie and asked, My lord, do you know where my master, Fushi, is? Songjie glanced at Cheng Huang indifferently and said, Your master is now Zhuan, not Fushi. Cheng Huang was unwilling to give up. Its eyes flickered and it continued to ask, My lord, I know my master is not dead. Can you tell me about him? Songjie sighed and said, Fushi is indeed not dead. He gave up the Fushi Cauldron on his own accord because he felt guilty and could not bear the responsibility of the past. So, he is no longer your master. Even if you see him, he will not acknowledge you. Cheng Huang trembled and a trace of sadness appeared in its eyes. It said, It was not my master's fault back then. I can only blame myself for being too weak and causing my master to fail his mission. Everything is in the past. Zhuan is now the true chosen one. Once the dust has settled on the heavenly armor planet, you will naturally see your master, Songjie said with a wave of his hand. Cheng Huang fell silent. It bowed to Songjie and re-entered the Fushi Cauldron. Zhuan watched all of this silently. He knew that something must have happened between Fushi and the Fushi Cauldron that caused the Fushi Cauldron to shatter and Fushi's whereabouts to be unknown. If Fushi is really not dead, then where is he? Zhuan slowly raised his head with a thoughtful expression. Suddenly, Songjie's gaze fell on the mysterious scabbard floating not far from Zhuan. His eyes were filled with surprise. He said, Zhanbi's blood splashing 5 steps? Where did you get it? Since Songjie asked, Zhuan naturally told him the whole story of how he got the mysterious scabbard. After listening to Zhuowen's story, Songjie sighed and said, Zhanbi is a demigod expert second only to me. He is very young and has not practiced for a long time, but he can reach the demigod level. It can be said that he was a real genius in antiquity times. At this point, Songjia looked at the mysterious scabbard and continued. This scabbard has been with Zhanbai since he started practicing martial arts. It has accompanied Zhanbai for countless years. In that era, when Zhanbai was still weak, he was fearless in the face of an expert who was much stronger than him. He drew his sword and killed the expert who wanted to oppress him. That battle shook the entire heavenly armor continent. Zhanbai named the scabbard blood-splashing 5 steps. At this point, Songjia hooked his right hand and the scabbard uncontrollably flew from Zhuowen to his hand. Then Songjia slowly rubbed the bloodstains on the surface of the scabbard. Zhanbai is the most talented and brave man I have ever seen. The reason why I was able to seal the divine sparring spear was because of Zhanbai's sacrifice. Since you can get Zhanbai's blood-splashing 5 steps, it means that you are destined to have this scabbard. At this point, Songjia took out a black iron sword from his sleeve. The surface of the iron sword was as smooth as water and emitted a bright light. When Zhuowen's gaze landed on the metal sword, his pupils constricted. He sized up the metal sword for a long time and realized that it was an extremely ordinary metal sword. It was not even a numinous treasure, but was made of ordinary metal. The blood-splashing 5 steps had followed Zhanbai for countless years. It had always been an ordinary scabbard and Zhanbai had never refined it into a powerful spiritual treasure or even a divine weapon. The moment Zhanbai ascended from the true immortal peak to the half-god realm, the scabbard absorbed a strand of star-god power from Zhanbai's ascension to the half-god realm. The scabbard underwent a metamorphosis, directly transforming from an ordinary item into a sub-god equipment. At this point, Songjia twisted his right hand and held the hilt of the iron sword. He inserted the iron sword into the scabbard accurately. Then Zhuowen clearly felt that the iron sword and the scabbard seemed to have a strange resonance at this moment. With the resonance, a powerful force that made Zhuowen's mind tremble gushed out from the iron sword. Clang! Songjia slowly pulled out the iron sword. Zhuowen's face changed slowly, becoming aghast and incredulous. This was because at this moment, the ordinary iron sword had undergone an earth-shattering change the moment it was unsheathed. The originally ordinary blade had become even sharper, even more dazzling, and even more frightening. At the instant the iron sword was completely unsheathed, a sword light that blazed like the sun surged out from the tip of the sword. It stimulated Zhuowen to the point he couldn't help but close his eyes, and it shocked Zhuowen to the point his heart stopped beating. Clang! Songjia suddenly put the iron sword back into the scabbard. The sharp and horrible spirit produced at the moment when the sword was pulled out disappeared instantly. The hall returned to tranquility. Is this the real mystery of the blood-splashing 5 steps? The mystery of turning something rotten into something magical? Zhuowen's heart thumped wildly. He stared at the mysterious scabbard in Songjia's hand in shock. Zhanbai only used 5 swords in his life. 1 step represents 1 sword. When he used all 5 steps and 5 swords, he would not attack again, because victory or defeat had been decided in those 5 steps. That year, when he was fighting with God Ganj, Zhanbai used the 6th sword, which was the last sword he used at the cost of his life. This sword injured God Ganj. Songjia's eyes were full of reminiscence. There was even a touch of admiration in this reminiscence. Zhuowen could not help admiring Songjia. Although he had never seen Zhanbai with his own eyes and had only seen his head, he knew that it required great talent and strength to be able to injure God Ganj in the demigod realm. Take this sword. Songjia threw the scabbard and the iron sword to Zhuowen with his right hand. He continued, the limit of the blood-splashing 5 steps is 5 swords. When you want to use the 6th sword, you have to pay with your life. So, don't use the 6th sword unless you have to. Receiving the blood-splashing 5 steps and the iron sword, Zhuowen's eyes became cautious. He nodded to Songjia and said in a low voice, "Predecessor, don't worry. I understand." Rumble. Songjia nodded slightly. When he was about to say something, his face changed dramatically. Blue veins bulged on his face as he showed a painful face. At the same time, the terrifying black veins around the large hall began to surge wildly. The large hall also began to tremble violently following the craziness of the black veins. Countless rock fragments fell from the top of the large hall, lifting a terrifying dust cloud. Juan, go quickly. Remember to bring Devour's infant here. I don't have much time left. Songjia roared from the throne. He waved his sleeve, and an invisible wind roared. Then, Juan felt his body was as light as a feather as he flew out of the hall. When Juan opened his eyes again, he was already outside Devour's left eye. After Juan left the hall, a black-cloaked man slowly came to the hall where Songjia was. He silently gazed at Songjia's ferocious face and said, "Predecessor Songjia, I've come as we agreed." Songjia's eyes were sometimes clear and sometimes crazy. The black-cloaked man frowned. "I've prepared the thing you want. Take it. Remember, you have to help Juan get Devour's infant." Songjia gritted his teeth. He waved his sleeve and handed a black crystal to the black-cloaked man. The black-cloaked man received the black crystal. After observing it for a while, he clasped his fists at Songjia. Then, he stomped his right foot and left the hall. "Where's the first mountain god?" Juan gazed at Devour's left eye, which was about to close. He looked around but didn't see the first mountain god. He knitted his brows. Swoosh! Right before Devour's left eye closed, a figure dashed out of it. Juan fixed his eyes on it and found that it was the first mountain god. The first mountain god glided to Juan, assessing him from head to toe. Then, he looked at the wound on Devour's body and said, "Juan, should we enter Devour's body now?" Juan gazed at the first mountain god. The first mountain god had entered the left eye with him, but they were separated. Juan thought that the first mountain god would come out earlier than him. He didn't expect that the first mountain god would come out later than him. Although the first mountain god's behavior wasn't suspicious, Juan vaguely felt that the first mountain god had another purpose for entering the left eye. "Yeah, let's get in." Juan nodded and didn't say anything. He stomped his foot and dashed into the wound. The first mountain god silently gazed at Juan's back. He squinted and chuckled. "This kid has a keen observation." When Juan and the first mountain god entered Devour's body through the wound, they felt as if they had fallen into a swamp. It was as if many invisible forces were squeezing their bodies. It wasn't a pleasant feeling at all. Devour's body is similar to the starry sky. However, the formidable resistance from the starry sky is much smaller. Ordinary warriors at the Heaven Immortal realm or above can endure this kind of resistance. However, in this environment, their speed will be reduced a lot. The first mountain god's body emitted a dark gold light, making him look like a god of war in golden armor. The formidable pressure around him was instantly offset. Juan had also used his perfect saint body, and he was barely able to withstand the terrifying resistance that was pressing down on him. Juan looked around and found many twinkling stars in front of him. However, most of these stars were dim, like candles in the wind that could be extinguished at any time. Juan didn't hurry to take action. Instead, he used his divine sense to spread out in front of him. Although Juan's cultivation was only at the late stage of the Heaven Immortal realm and there was a huge gap between him and a true Immortal realm expert, Juan's divine sense was different. This was because he had the primitive talisman in his sea of consciousness. This primitive talisman contained rich origin energy. By relying on the origin energy, the senses of Juan's soul could reach back to the origin. As a result, the senses of his soul could extend to infinitely far places, just like when he comprehended the Tao intent within the boulder. Not only was it located in the center of this space, but Juan also discovered that the area around this khaki-colored planet was a vacuum zone. Around the vacuum zone, there was a circular rock belt. This rock belt flickered with a rather dazzling light, looking rather gorgeous. When Juan's divine sense fell on this khaki-colored planet and was about to enter it, a powerful restriction covered the surface of the planet, preventing Juan's divine sense from exploring. This planet. Juan frowned and revealed a look of surprise when his divine sense was blocked. The first mountain god naturally noticed Juan's abnormality and couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Shun, did you find something?" Withdrawing his divine sense, Zhuan slowly opened his eyes, nodded to the first mountain god, and immediately said, I found a khaki-colored planet in the center of this space. I'm afraid that the Lord of the Divine Tomb and the Divine Lord Do Hua should be on this planet. Zhuo Wen's eyes flickered. He knew very well that the only person who could set up such a powerful restriction was the Celestial Saint Master by Do Hua's side, Elder Gu. He dared to conclude that the Divine Lord Do Hua's group was on that planet. If that's the case, let's go. As the first mountain god spoke, the two of them turned into a long rainbow and flew toward the direction Zhuowen had pointed out. That's when Zhuowen and the first mountain god swept past the planet where Ji Wubing, Wei Wuyin, and the others were, they immediately attracted the attention of the 5 people, causing them to reveal looks of surprise. Jun, that little bastard, Wei Wuyin, the first corpse king, and Kong Lianxuan looked at Zhuowen's figure and gnashed their teeth in anger. However, the 3 of them were extremely wary of the first mountain god by Zhuowen's side, so they naturally didn't dare to attack Zhuowen now. Let's follow and see. Ji Wubing immediately made up his mind. He left the planet and chased after Zhuowen and the first mountain god, while the other 4 looked at each other and followed closely behind. However, the 5 of them didn't dare to get too close. After all, the first mountain god by Zhuowen's side was an expert comparable to a genuine immortal. If they got too close and the first mountain god really had evil intentions, they would be in deep trouble. Jun naturally saw the 5 people following behind him. The corners of his mouth curled into a sneer, but he didn't pay too much attention to them. The reason why he swept past the planet where Ji Wubing and the others were was naturally on purpose. With the first mountain god by their side, these 5 people would definitely follow them. After all, compared to blindly searching, it would be more convenient to have a genuine immortal like the first mountain god leading the way. The surface of the khaki-colored planet had been set up with a rather powerful restriction formation by the ancient god. If one person were to destroy it, the cost would be quite high. With Ji Wubing and the other 4, he and the first mountain god wouldn't have to waste too much energy. Moreover, the first zombie king, Wei Wuyin, and Kong Lianxuan had a lot of grudges with Zhuan. If these 3 people didn't know what was good for them and provoked him after entering the khaki-colored planet, he would settle this grudge once and for all. After a while, the group came to the surface of the khaki-colored planet. Zhuowen and the first mountain god stood quietly in front of the planet. As for Ji Wubing and the other 4, they stopped at another place, some distance away from Zhuowen and the first mountain god, with vigilant looks in their eyes. Everyone, there are extremely powerful restrictions on the surface of this planet. Only the Celestial Saint Master from the Primal Chaos Temple can set up such restrictions. Zhuowen explained. He knew very well that there were some things that didn't need to be said too clearly. He only needed to mention a little, and it would be enough to arouse everyone's imagination. Sure enough, after Zhuowen finished speaking, the eyes of Ji Wubing and the other 4 flashed as they stared at the restriction formation on the surface of the planet. Since God Master Do Hua and the others have entered this planet and set up a restriction formation on the surface of this planet, there must be something good inside. We can't let them beat us to it, the first zombie king said gloomily. The others also nodded and looked at Ji Wubing. Ji Wubing pondered for a moment, then cupped his fist to Zhuowen and the first mountain god, and said in a deep voice, I'm afraid this planet is not simple. I think the 2 of you also want to enter this place. Why don't you work together to break this restriction formation? The corners of Zhuowen's mouth curled up, and he said with a smile, This Zhuo has the same idea. I know a little about restrictions. After I find the weakness of this restriction formation, we can work together to break it. With that, Zhuowen rushed to the surface of the restriction formation. After circling around it a few times, he pointed at the surface of the restriction formation with his right finger and said in a deep voice, Everyone, let's work together to attack this place. The first mountain god took the lead and rushed out, followed by Ji Wubing and the other 4. The multicolored attacks smashed into the place Zhuowen had pointed at. Then, the seals covering the surface of the earthen yellow planet collapsed with countless explosions. Someone broke the restriction formation I set up. Somewhere on a high slope on the khaki planet, Elder Gu, who was following behind the god Master Do Hua, frowned and muttered in a low voice. On this high slope, in addition to the God Master Do Hua and Elder Gu, there were also the four lords of the battlefield, Yang Yi's group, the Lord of the Divine Tomb, and Shiji's group. It should be Zhuoan or Ji Wubing. This is just a small matter. Let's move on. This planet is the central planet of the exotic beast. If I'm not wrong, it must contain the exotic beast's inheritance. I don't think anyone wants to let go of such a thing, Do Hua said lightly. Humph. Who knows if what you said is true? Previously, you said that the planet inside this exotic beast's body contained a star core. However, when I checked the cores of several planets, there were no star cores at all, Shiji said with a sneer. Do Hua glanced at Shiji and said with a smile, Brother Shi, this is the first time this dough has entered the exotic beast's body. I didn't expect the planets inside to have no star cores. It seems that the star cores of these planets should have been absorbed by the exotic beast in advance. This beast is not a cultivator. It only devours planets to absorb the energy in the planet's star core. It does not refine the star core like human cultivators, allowing the planet to produce endless energy for itself. Although there are many planets in this beast's body, most of them are like abandoned planets, not worth mentioning, the Lord of the Divine Tomb said indifferently. Do Hua smiled and said, That's not the point. If everyone can help me open this planet, everyone can have a share of the exotic beast's inheritance on this planet. Everyone smiled faintly when they heard Do Hua's words, but they did not answer. Although no one knew what Do Hua's purpose was, they could still guess. However, no one pointed it out. After all, before the benefits appeared, they really needed to work together. It was not time to fall out with each other. Suddenly, the jade deity bird artifact in Do Hua's hand burst out with a blazing jade light. Then, Do Hua's eyes narrowed and he laughed. It seems that our destination is not too far away. Everyone else was stunned as well. Although they did not believe Do Hua's words, they were rather convinced by the jade deity's artifact. After all, it was something that had been left behind since the ancient times. It had been around for a long time and was quite famous. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.